The house will be in order. The prayer will be offered by guest chaplain Pastor Greg Shipe from First Baptist Church from Bellefonte, Pennsylvania.
Let's pray together. O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is your name in all the earth. We confess that your word is proven and you are a shield to all those who trust in you. We thank you for the freedoms, the blessings, and the responsibilities you have bestowed on this land. And Father, we humbly bow before you, asking you to guide this house as they debate, vote, and interact with one another and their constituents, and they would do so in a manner pleasing to you. We pray that you would grant them wisdom, a wisdom not derived from fallible man, but rather from you and your infallible word. We pray for families in our nation and the needs of vulnerable children. We believe, Father, that righteousness exalts a nation. And so we pray for justice and truth to prevail, and that you might be glorified in this nation. And we ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
The chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House the approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Espiat.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Without objection, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize my pastor, Pastor Greg Shipe of the First Baptist Church in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, who offered today's opening prayer in the United States House of Representatives. Pastor Shipe was ordained into ministry in 2009 and has served the congregation of the First Baptist Church since 2011. I'm fortunate to be a member of the First Baptist Church congregation. When he's not behind the pulpit, Pastor Shipe serves as the chaplain to the Logan Firehouse Fire Company and coaches recreational youth, soccer, and baseball. Pastor Shipe and his wife Connie are also busy raising 6 children. They are active foster parents as well. They use their experience to mentor other foster parents in Centre County and beyond. As a foster mentor, Pastor Shipe also serves on the board of Keystone Family Alliance, a bridge ministry helping to connect churches to foster agencies, to equip them in caring for children, and to provide resources to local agencies and foster families. Mr. Speaker, Pastor Shipe and his family continue to inspire those in our congregation as well as the entire community, and I'm thankful for my pastor and this mighty man of God. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The chair will entertain up to 5 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
Seek leave to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor the life of Dale Schneider, who passed away last week at the age of 76. Born in St. Cloud, Minnesota, Dale took over the family-owned Sal's Bar and Grill in St. Joseph, Minnesota, from his parents in 1971. Sal's is at a crossroads of St. John's University and the College of St. Benedict, where all things Johnny's and Benny's reign supreme. For over 50 years, Dale kept thirsty students, faculty, and community members well hydrated and fed. Dale had a steel trap of a memory that helped him to remember names of college alumni years after graduation. And in some cases, he also remembered their outstanding bar tabs. I had the pleasure of getting to know Dale during my many visits to Sal's over the years. No trip to a Johnny's football game was complete without a post-game beer at Sal's. There is some solace in the fact that the next time I'm at Sal's, I'll likely see his son Kyle tending bar just like his dad. To Dale's wife, Diane, and the rest of the family, we pray that Dale's lasting memory gives you comfort during this difficult time. Great life lived. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from the Bronx seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Harry Belafonte was a lifelong public servant and civil rights advocate who selflessly used the power of his voice to entertain us through songs, as well as to build awareness and bring attention to numerous social and political causes for vulnerable communities across the United States and the world. He was a hit maker and a change maker. From New York City to Hollywood, he broke barriers. His efforts helped propel the civil rights movement and created an appetite for justice across the country. Harry Belafonte was an entertainer, an ambassador for humanity, an advocate for goodwill across this planet. An alumni of George Washington High School in my district, Mr. Belafonte was a Harlem treasure, an ambassador for humanity, and he will never be forgotten. Today, I honor his life, his legacy, and the contributions he made to the global community. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Seek unanimous consent to address the House floor for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to speak on the bill I will introduce today, the TEACH Act, Teachers Empowered Against Classroom Harm. This bill would ensure that those who choose to protect children from armed intruders have the opportunity to do so. We are all aware of the tragedy that took place at the Covenant School in my district a month ago. These types of tragedies are indicative of the evil that exists in our world. And while we'll never be able to ban the intentions of evil people, we can allow men and women to equip themselves in order to protect our children and to stop bad actors in their tracks. The TEACH Act would take money from the Education Secretary's slush fund, over $27.5 million, and use that money to provide defensive training programs designed to protect schools and our most precious asset, our children. There are untold numbers of humble, patriotic men and women serving in our schools that would take steps to protect our children. The Teachers Empowered Against Classroom Harm, the TEACH Act, would help make our students, our educators, and our classrooms safer. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in celebration of American Libraries Week. This is a perfect time to thank our local libraries and the employees that keep them open to the public to ensure access to reading and learning. While extreme MAGA Republicans are banning books and bashing librarians, House Democrats are protecting and recognizing their public libraries. We are putting people over politics. That's why I'm proud to honor my local library, the Houston Public Library. Mr. Speaker, they announced that with their local support, our library will no longer charge late fees on overdue books or other borrowed items. This is one of the many efforts that they're making to make sure that libraries are more accessible. And in honor of public libraries, I am reintroducing my bill, the More Social Workers in Libraries Act, today. Public libraries are vital community hubs, and this bill will reinforce America's social worker talent pipeline by creating a paid social worker internship at public libraries across the nation. Libraries are for learning. They're for seeking resources and finding job opportunities. We need to lift them up and not bash them. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from the Beehive State seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I wish to address the House for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you.
Today I rise with a profound sense of reverence and humility to honor the legacy of a true American hero, Mr. Ken Potts. Mr. Potts was one of the last two U.S. Arizona survivors who recently passed away at 102. On the morning of December 7th, 1941, Ken Potts answered the call of duty. As a crane operator, Mr. Potts had the responsibility of ferrying supplies to the USS Arizona. Upon reaching the harbor, he was confronted with a scene of devastation. Mr. Potts stood as a beacon of hope. With dauntless courage, he wielded his crane as an instrument of salvation, plucking survivors from the jaws of peril and guiding them to the sanctuary off Ford Island. To the Potts family, and especially Doris, Ken's beloved wife, our hearts are with you as you honor his memory today in this esteemed chamber. I'm profoundly privileged to pay homage to this indomitable spirit of Ken Potts. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I see unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today as a proud adoptee, a son with two loving parents who provided me with all the love and support a child could ever ask for. But yet, I heard in this chamber a few days ago that someone saying my parents aren't real parents. Let me be clear, I am their child, they are my parents, and for bigoted, closed-minded reason, certain folks have decided that people who adopt their children are lesser than. But make no mistake, whether you adopted your child, had biological children, or found your chosen family in some other way, you are a parent. And because I haven't seen any of my Republican colleagues in this chamber condemn these disgusting comments, I hope that they don't also agree with it. Because I won't allow anyone in this chamber to disrespect my family or yours. And directly to the people who have opened up their hearts and homes to children ready for their embrace, don't let anyone ever diminish who you are. You are real parents, a parent and nothing less. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair would remind members to direct their comments to the chair. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the floor for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in honor of National Park Week to highlight my bill, the Chiricahua National Park Act. From the Grand Canyon to the Petrified Forest in the Saguaro National Park, Arizona is lucky to have some of the most stunning parks in the world. In our own district, Chiricahua National Monument has drawn visitors from around the country and across the globe for almost 100 years. The Wonderlands of the Rocks showcases the unique beauty of our region through 12,000 acres of towering geological structure, 25 campsites, and over 17 miles of hiking trails. Local communities and leaders from both sides of the aisle have advocated for years to give this beloved landmark the national park designation it deserves. It's my honor to renew this long-awaited effort. Establishing Chiricahua National Park would create a profound impact on Cochise County by enhancing tourism, boosting local economy, and fueling opportunity at no additional cost. It's time to make this dream a reality and upgrade Chiricahua. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from the Keystone State seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize World Autism Month and the efforts of North Central Pennsylvanians in supporting those with autism. In America today, 1 in 36 children will be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder beginning in their first years of life. Although several factors may influence development of autism, each person with an autism diagnosis requires unique support. In Clarion and Venango Counties, Autism Tough Foundation works to raise awareness and support for autism through numerous sensory-free events each year. This month, more than 100 students at Keystone High School joined Autism Tough Foundation to raise awareness in their first Walk for Autism. Meanwhile, neighboring Potter County is one of the first in Pennsylvania to equip county agency with sensory kits to aid in communications and expressive language. Potter County is also home to Jasmine Floof, a service dog who specializes in assisting those with autism focus their attention and manage anxiety when accessing county services. This World Autism Month, I commend Potter County and Autism Tough Foundation for leading the state in supporting people with autism in their everyday lives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 327, I call up Joint Resolution HJ Res 39, disapproving the rule submitted by the Department of Commerce relating to procedures covering suspension of liquidation duties and estimated duties in accord with Presidential Proclamation 10414 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the joint resolution.
Union Calendar Number 24, House Joint Resolution 39, Joint Resolution disapproving the rules submitted by the Department of Commerce relating to procedures covering suspension of liquidation, duties, and estimated duties in accord with Presidential Proclamation 10414.
Pursuant to House Resolution 327, the joint resolution is considered read. The joint resolution shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means or their respective designees. The gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Smith, and the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, will each control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and submit extraneous material on the resolution under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we take a bipartisan step towards holding China accountable for its trade abuses. These trade abuses are well known to all of us in this chamber. Most recently, this past December, President Biden's Commerce Department found that China is circumventing tariffs on imports into the U.S. by shipping solar products through not one country, not 2 countries, not even 3 countries, in fact, 4 countries in Southeast Asia. These tariffs were put in place by President Obama since 2012 to provide a level playing field for American manufacturers who were facing unfair competition in the U.S. market from the solar products that China was subsidizing and selling at unfairly low prices. By circumventing these tariffs by shipping its products through Cambodia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam, China has set up a solar panel export scheme that cheats American workers and consumers. So we know there's wrongdoing going on. We know China is cheating. And that's precisely why members of both parties were stunned and disappointed when the White House made the misguided decision to halt for 2 years additional tariffs on Chinese solar products being sent through these 4 countries. At a time when China has a dominant position in solar production, despite longstanding American innovation in this sector, should we really be telling the world that there will be less accountability for unfair trade practices? The answer is not just no. Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely no. But the President's proclamation to halt any new countervailing duties and tariffs does just that. And what's worse, it establishes a lesser standard of accountability for China than the rest of the world. The legislation before us today, House Joint Resolution 39, Congressional Review Act legislation on solar tariffs, will stop President Biden's proclamation that has given a free pass for 2 years to unfair solar imports from China that circumvent our trade laws. The United States must maintain crucial protections for American workers and our economy as a whole. We cannot surrender to China or any other country and put American workers at a disadvantage. This resolution has bipartisan support. I want to thank Representative Posey for leading this initiative and Ways and Means Committee members Dan Kildee of Michigan, Greg Murphy of North Carolina, Bill Pascrell of New Jersey, and Nicole Malliotakis of New York, and Claudia Tenney of New York. The fact that Democrats and Republicans on our committee are original co-sponsors of this resolution shows just how bipartisan the issue is. We have to confront the Chinese Communist Party's bad behavior. We have to hold it accountable. I urge you to vote in favor of this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I rise in opposition to this resolution. My Republican friends continue to be in a state of denial for the climate crisis, the real and urgent sense that we have now. Last month in Houston, I had an opportunity to meet with 24 leaders of the renewable energy sector. They weren't concerned about rolling back the things that we've done. They wanted to accelerate it. The chairman and my Republican colleagues have spoken at length about the importance of increasing accountability for China's unfair trade practices and maintaining protection for American workers. It's interesting, though, that these same individuals voted against Democratic provisions to strengthen our anti-dumping and circumvention laws and reauthorize the Trade Adjustment Assistance in the American Competes Act. They all voted against the Inflation Reduction Act's provision to incentivize clean energy domestic manufacturing. And in fact, 2 days ago, they voted to repeal these provisions. This resolution would undermine America's hard-fought wins in the Inflation Reduction Act. There are problems. No doubt the Chinese are likely cheating. But President Biden struck the right balance by instituting a temporary freeze on these solar tariffs. This approach is how we fix the long-term problem. Importantly, he has said that he does not intend to extend the freeze beyond June 2024, and that he will veto this resolution if it gets to his desk. My friends on the other side of the aisle are concerned about working men and women. I would point out that the President's position is consistent with the leaders in organized labor, from IBEW, from Luna, the carpenters and operating engineers, people who represent these hardworking Americans, as well as organizations in the environmental community and the National Taxpayers Union. This is a 2-year bridge that gives the solar industry the time needed to reorient supply chains away from China and produce panels domestically. We can't do that overnight, but we're committed to making that change. For too long, the United States has lacked a cohesive, renewable energy manufacturing policy. As a result, we've outsourced far too much of our production. In 2021, there are only 7 gigawatts of domestic manufacturing capacity. That's the reality. But the Inflation Reduction Act marks a significant departure from those flawed policies of the past. This legislation bakes in domestic content bonuses in clean energy credits to incentivize the industry to onshore production. But that takes time. It also revives the advanced manufacturing credit and created a new manufacturing production tax credit. The Inflation Reduction Act has already led to the announcement of more than 45 gigawatts of domestic solar manufacturing capacity. Again, my Republican colleagues voted to repeal all those incentives just 2 days ago. Ending the President's temporary initiative would immediately institute high retroactive tariffs in the hundreds of percent that would hurt solar development, increase energy costs, and lead to a supply reduction at exactly the moment when the climate crisis means that we need to ramp it up. Many of us in Congress worked for years to achieve the policy victories contained in the Inflation Reduction Act. The clean energy tax credits are projected to reduce carbon emissions 40% by 2030, giving us a legitimate chance to meet the goals contained in the Paris Climate Agreement. We should resist these efforts to undermine this hard-won victory for America. I would encourage my colleagues to take a hard look at this legislation and then reject it when it comes before us for a vote. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also want to highlight another member of the House Ways and Means Committee that is a co-sponsor and a supporter of this resolution, Ms. Terry Sewell from Alabama. Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to submit for the record a letter from Oxen Solar founder and CEO thanking Speaker McCarthy and House Republicans for bringing this resolution to the House floor. Oxen is a small California company with 37 full-time employees that filed a petition last year asking the Department of Commerce to investigate whether Chinese firms were circumventing existing tariffs. Oxen strongly supports this resolution so that the company and its workers can get relief from unfair Chinese competition and end what it calls the get-out-of-jail-free card that President Biden gave to duty evaders. And I'd like to recognize the gentleman from North Carolina for 2 minutes, Mr. Murphy.
Before the gentleman is recognized, without objection, your request will be ordered for submission into the record. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of HJ Resolution 39. We are here today because the Biden administration is hell-bent on making the United States energy dependent upon China. They are hell-bent on signing this nation's death warrant. In pursuit of everything green, the Biden administration has given a free pass for Chinese solar imports to flow into this country, by all means, using an emergency proclamation. The last time a president used an emergency proclamation was for lumber in 1946, when American World War II veterans were returning home and they needed homes. But today, President Biden, or whoever's running the White House, is using it to waive tariffs on Chinese solar panels coming from Cambodia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam for 2 years. Helping war heroes is an emergency, but speeding up total dependence on our greatest adversary is another. It's an absolute abuse of executive power. It is helping our greatest adversary take control of this country. Why on God's green earth are we handing this nation's keys to the nation of China? Chinese producers and the CCP are taking advantage of this system to circumnavigate the tariffs. They are cheating. But don't just take my word, take the President's own Commerce Department, who determined that this would happen even before President Biden did his emergency proclamation. This is simply un-American and a clear, crystal clear abuse of emergency power by the President. We need to prioritize American manufacturing, not Chinese manufacturing. We need to produce the energy here in the United States, not handing this to China, our greatest adversary. I urge my colleagues subsequently to support this bill, House HJ Resolution 39. With that, I'll yield my time back.
The gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman from Missouri reserve?
Reserved.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record statements from the Carpenters and Operating Engineers Union, who oppose legislation that eliminates thousands of jobs, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and Luna.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 1/2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Congressman Doggett.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 1/2 minutes.
Here comes the sun. It's more than a great tune, it's about a great renewable future. But our Republican colleagues refuse to see through the dark smoke of fossil fuels and fossilized thinking. They just blindly follow Trump at every opportunity to try to reduce progress on addressing the very real climate crisis. President Biden is both enforcing our trade laws and maintaining our commitment for more solar power by giving American companies a reasonable time to adjust their supply chains away from China and without an unreasonable disruption of installing more solar panels all across this country. And this temporary tariff pause ends in only about a year. But that's just not soon enough for those who are determined to disrupt our move to a clean energy future. And I must say this is a truly anti-business move because it penalizes companies that have relied on, in good faith, on the President's order. And it also, as my colleague from Oregon has just shown, it will kill a number of good-paying union jobs across this country. Despite the ice mess in Greenland and Antarctica, melting at an average of about 420 billion tons every year, already raising sea levels in the Gulf of Mexico, Republican opposition in fighting climate change remains frozen in the past. Trading fossil fuel and fossil power for the power of the sun by getting as many solar panels as soon as possible is one way that more and more American families and American businesses can make their contribution to their own lower energy bills, but to help us respond to the climate crisis that is already engulfing America with wildfires and intensified weather like tornadoes and floods and droughts in different places, and of course, hotter and hotter and hotter. At this dawn of a new clean energy era, now is not the time to eclipse solar. In Texas, we are already number 2 in the country among the states for solar capacity, creating thousands of new jobs and providing clean energy and lower energy bills to thousands of families. Austinites know that solar power saves them on their energy bills and saves them when storms disrupt the grid. I hope my colleagues will see the light, will see the power of solar, and join us in voting no on this misguided proposal. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman from Oregon reserve? Gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 4 minutes to the original sponsor of this resolution, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman, Chairman Smith, for yielding. Today, we are considering a historic bipartisan resolution to support American solar manufacturers and workers and hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for dodging our trade laws. H.J. Res. 39 will undo a Biden administration's rule that allowed Chinese solar manufacturers who use forced labor to dodge American trade laws and dump inferior product on the United States. They're doing this by slapping a new label on their products and exporting them to third-party countries like Cambodia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam. The Department of Commerce, in a preliminary investigation, concluded that the Chinese solar companies are in fact sending their products through these 4 Southeastern Asian countries to avoid paying a higher tariff. If left in place, this rule will benefit the Chinese Communist Party. Make no mistake about that. They are not our friends. They are an enemy, at the detriment of American companies and workers. Unfortunately, some believe we must tolerate China's bad decisions and remain dependent on adversarial nations to create renewable energy. That's a false choice, so says the AFL-CIO. The United States can and should focus its resources into developing our own solar products and boosting American competitiveness around the world, rather than supporting China's quest to dominate the market and control energy supply. This bipartisan resolution is a critical step to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for everything from their human rights abuses to their unfair trade practices, all the while protecting American solar manufacturers and workers. Why not be an exporter of great American products rather than an importer of cheap Chinese products? And for those who say they're clean energy advocates, I'd like to remind them that the Chinese solar panels are built without any environmental protection or controls whatsoever. American solar panels have environmental protection requirements. Most are aware, and I hope everyone in this chamber for sure is aware, that through economic dominance, China hopes to achieve military superiority. And we need to stop helping China do that. How good is this resolution? As if the facts are not clear enough already, keep this in mind. This is a policy that President Obama and President Trump both agreed on. I know that's hard to believe, but you heard that right. It's a policy that President Obama and President Trump both agreed on. Additionally, we shouldn't sacrifice the Uyghur people at the altar of convenience. So I ask my colleagues to join me in supporting America and H.J. Res. 39, and I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Missouri reserves. Gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate my colleagues' newfound concern for the environment and for the industry. I would like to enter into the record correspondence from the solar industry in the United States opposing their resolution and supporting our position.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. I would like to turn to the gentleman from California who played an instrumental role in crafting many of these energy provisions. I love the partnership with him. I'm going to recognize him for 2 minutes.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for his leadership and for giving me the extra time to speak. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this legislation. Mr. Speaker, I share my colleague's goal of ensuring that our trade laws are fairly enforced. And I certainly share our collective goal of promoting domestic manufacturing and jobs. But let's be honest. The idea that our president wants to ship jobs to China and make us dependent on China for our energy, this may sound good, this political hyperbole may sound good, but it's flat out nonsense. Truth is, if this legislation were to become law, it would cost, not create, American jobs. And in the long run, it would make it harder, not easier, for our country to become energy independent. This bill would make it impossible to deploy solar energy quickly enough here in our country, here in the United States of America. It would undercut the climate change investments in the Inflation Reduction Act, the biggest investment in fighting climate change and creating green jobs in our history. This is an investment that we need. We've already heard from numerous speakers the impact that we've felt from climate change, fires, floods, drought, an increase in agricultural pests. This is at a point where we need to deploy everything we can to make sure we address the issue of climate change. We all want solar products manufactured right here at home, and that will happen. But in the short run, our domestic industry can't increase production fast enough to meet our demand or meet our climate goals. I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Oregon reserves. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask for unanimous consent to submit for the record an article from Politico called Trio of Democrat Senators Back Resolution to Undo Biden's Solar Tariff Pause. This article notes that 3 Democrat senators, including the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, Senator Wyden, Senator Manchin from West Virginia, and Senator Brown from Ohio, have publicly supported rescinding President Biden's action to pause tariffs on Chinese solar panels even before the CRA has even passed the House. I understand that at least one more Democrat senator has also expressed support. I thank my Democrat colleagues in the House and in the Senate for joining me in standing up for American workers by supporting consistent enforcement of our trade laws against China's unfair trade practices.
And so ordered. And before we proceed, I would note that both sides have approximately 20 minutes, 30 seconds left of their allotted time. Gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes from the great gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta.
Well, thank you very much. I thank the gentleman, my friend, the chairman, for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.J. Res. 39, a bipartisan joint resolution of which I am proud to be an original co-sponsor. We are a nation of laws. It is not up to the president to determine which laws to enforce and which laws to ignore if they don't conform to that president's particular agenda. If we allow communist China to blatantly violate our trade laws with impunity, as the Commerce Department has concluded is occurring, how can we expect other nations to follow those laws and conduct business with us in a fair manner? Those who oppose this joint resolution will say the imposition of these tariffs will handicap renewable projects across this country that rely on a continuous supply of solar panels and materials. I understand this concern and am not opposed to the deployment of more renewable energy projects. However, I am opposed to the United States maintaining a supply chain reliant on communist China and their forced slave labor. We should instead be working to build up our own domestic solar manufacturing industry and send signals to industry that the time to shorten supply chains is long past due. Unfortunately, these domestic companies operate at a disadvantage when communist China gets to break the rules and undermine the markets with their cheap prices. I urge my colleagues to stand up for American workers and for American energy independence. Vote yes on HJ Res 39. And Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Ohio was recognized, yields back his time. The gentleman from Missouri reserves. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Illinois, Congressman Davis.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman from Oregon for his leadership and for yielding. Mr. Speaker, solar energy is one form of electricity generation that is growing in the United States. Yet we do not have the economy of scale in manufacturing solar systems to meet supply and demand for industry or consumers. Solar energy accounts for 3.9% of total electricity generation in 2021, compared to 0.7% in 2014. Currently, domestic solar production is sold out for the next 2 to 3 years. In order to continue to address China's unfair trading policies, the United States, and allow America's solar industry to grow, President Biden's Proclamation 10414 declared an emergency with respect to U.S. electricity generation capacity by implementing a final rule that permits the importation of select cells or modulars without the payment of anti-dumping and countervailing duty temporary for 24 months. Therefore, I urge my colleagues to vote no and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Oregon reserves. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask for unanimous consent to submit for the record a statement from the Uyghur Human Rights Project in support of HJ Res 39. The statement highlights the close connection between the CCP solar industry and the ongoing human rights abuses and forced labor being perpetrated against the Uyghurs. This is bipartisan consensus that these practices are unacceptable and must be stopped.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from the state of New York, Ms. Tinney.
The gentlelady from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of HJ Res 39, critical legislation to undo the Biden administration's job-crushing solar policies. Last year, an American solar manufacturer petitioned the Commerce Department to investigate whether China was circumventing tariffs on solar products by sneaking them through countries in Southeast Asia. Before that investigation even finished, President Biden issued a proclamation to allow the imports of unfairly traded solar products from China. Later, just as we expected, it was discovered by the Commerce Department that China was indeed violating U.S. trade laws. President Biden's irresponsible proclamation is a slap in the face to American manufacturers. It allows Chinese solar companies to flood our market with their products tariff-free, hurting American jobs. It is the Green New Deal agenda at work. President Biden's proclamation also sends the message to trade cheats everywhere that U.S. trade laws don't matter. This invites even more cheating, and this is only the tip of the spear of the dangerous Green New Deal agenda. A recent report from the Coalition for Prosperous America revealed that the Chinese manufacturers could earn nearly $125 billion, and that's with a B, in U.S. renewable energy tax credits as a result of the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. This would be a significant boon to Chinese solar manufacturers on top of the massive giveaway given to China by President Biden's proclamation. We must stand with American manufacturers and jobs, not the Chinese Communist Party, and pass this crucial legislation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Missouri reserves. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a statement from the National Taxpayers Union opposing the proposal from our Republican friends to raise tariffs on solar goods.
Without objection, so ordered.
I'm honored to recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Byer, for a minute.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for a minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I believe almost all of us are here to make America stronger, to serve the people who sent us here. But this act will do exactly the opposite. It will hurt the 33,000 American solar installers who will lose their jobs. It will raise energy costs for families everywhere, but especially in the Sun Belt. It will hurt all Americans who hope to use the solar tax credit. And it will hurt the energy companies, the businesses who built major solar installations in the last 8 months, who will be subject to a retroactive tariff of 254%. And it will harm our endangered planet. It will handcuff us in our fight against climate change. And the act will not help our growing domestic solar panel manufacturers who are already sold out till the end of the pause. And it won't hurt China, who has abundant suppliers, buyers in the rest of the world. This is the same China who ships 1 million packages a day duty-free to the United States because of our $800 de minimis exception. Mr. Speaker, this is an act with only creates losers. There are no winners. And I urge my friends to vote no.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Oregon reserves. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to submit for the record a press release from President Biden's Department of Commerce that states the department determined in December 2022, after a thorough investigation, that Chinese solar companies are circumventing U.S. tariffs on solar products. The evidence is clear. Chinese companies have set up shop in Cambodia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam to get around U.S. tariffs that were put in place in 2012 by President Obama, yet the Biden administration is turning a blind eye on American workers, American manufacturers, by waiving additional tariffs, while it acknowledges cheating by Chinese companies. I reserve the balance.
Without objection, so ordered. The gentleman from Missouri reserves. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Panetta, for 1.5 minutes.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, I rise in opposition to this resolution because American solar companies need the delay on solar tariffs so that they can keep up with the American demand for clean energy. If we repeal this delay with this CRA, American solar industry could be hit with more than $1 billion with a B, billion in retroactive duties, taxes that would cause cancellations and supply chain issues, stall solar deployment, and set us back on our clean energy goals. Look, we've already seen, just with the threat of these tariffs, that's caused a 30% decrease in solar deployment just last year. Now, of course, we want to strategically decouple from China, I believe, especially with their solar pieces, parts, and equipment. However, American solar companies need more time to adapt, to adjust, and to reduce Chinese inputs in solar panels. I also realize that we need to do more to bolster our domestic solar manufacturing. But that's why we recently made significant investments for domestic credits. However, if we allow these retroactive tariffs to take place now, it would deprive our solar industry of the incentive to invest in our manufacturing projects at home. That's why we need this delay, and that's why this delay was the right call, not just by this administration. It's also the right call so that the American solar industry can catch up to our domestic demand, so that Americans can continue to speed up their solar deployment, and that America can continue to step up when it comes to the continued success of our economy and the future of our sustainability. That is why I urge a no vote on this CRA. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Oregon reserves. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Missouri continues to reserve. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
I recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Chu, for 1 minute.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise in opposition to this resolution. Democrats successfully passed America's single largest investment in clean and renewable energy last year in the Inflation Reduction Act, which will quickly decarbonize our economy and shift manufacturing back here to the U.S. And that includes production of solar panels that will be critical to the clean energy transition. Last year, the Commerce Department made a thorough and data-driven determination that some companies in 4 Southeast Asian countries are circumventing U.S. tariffs on Chinese solar panels. But our trade policy requires balance, and the President's emergency order created a short-term bridge to secure the solar materials needed to protect jobs and meet our energy transition goods over the next year. While the emergency order is not perfect, it's necessary to give solar projects in the pipeline enough time to come into full compliance with our trade laws. I urge my colleagues to vote no, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Oregon reserves. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, we're prepared to close if the other side has no further witnesses.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to enter into the record a statement from the League of Conservation Voters, the Natural Resources Defense Council, the Sierra Club, Climate Action Campaign, the Environmental Law and Policy Center, Clean Energy for America, the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, Earth Justice, the Environmental Defense Fund, and the Union of Concerned Scientists that urge the rejection of the proposal that our Republican friends are making.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm prepared to close at this point.
Gentleman is recognized to close.
Thank you. The concern I have is that what is being missed here is the reality that we are dependent on a supply chain in which China plays a key role. We don't like it. My Republican friends don't like it. Unfortunately, they have undermined efforts that we have to try and reposition the supply chain. The energy proposals that we have offered up are an opportunity to grow and strengthen America's capacity. Just yesterday, they would repeal a number of those provisions. Their proposal would impose over $1 billion of retroactive tariffs on our solar industry at a time when we're trying to grow it. We want to give the industry time to reorient the supply chain. That takes time. It's already made clear on the floor right now that the current solar industry is at capacity. They need time to change the supply chains. Sadly, my Republican friends would reduce incentives to strengthen the American supply chain. The reality is, in the past, we've allowed China to have a dominant position. We don't want that. We've offered up a variety of proposals that would strengthen, incentivize American business. But this proposal, if enacted, would punish American workers, would punish American business, and set us back on our climate goals. That does not serve anybody well. Instead, the Biden administration has offered a reasonable compromise, extending for 2 years the ability to continue the course here while we reorient the supply chain. I have a whole host of proposals if my colleagues want to be tough on China. Mr. Beyer referenced the fact that we have, through the de minimis provisions, we are allowing over 2 million packages a day into the United States stream of commerce, often, no doubt, used by forced labor, uninspected, and not paying tariffs. This is a simple common sense provision that we've offered up that would help change that. And we have others if people want to deal meaningfully with the Chinese challenge. But this doesn't. This doesn't change the reality of our current dependence on China for the supply chain. And indeed, it will complicate our ability to make the transition. I respectfully urge that we reject this resolution and allow the opportunity for our industry to get its footing and make the transition that we all want them to make. I appreciate the opportunity to share my opinions and a chance to yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time under House Resolution 327. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized to close.
Mr. Speaker, my grandfather always told me that actions speak louder than words. We've heard a lot of words about people standing up to China. this resolution will have every member in this body to have the opportunity to stand up to China. And this is the way to do it. I am so thankful that we have Democrat senators, including my counterpart, Senator Wyden on the other side of the aisle, that is willing to do the right thing for the American worker and to do what President Obama did in 2012 and to make sure that the solar industry works for America and not become beholden to China. Today, the U.S. Congress has the opportunity to send a direct message to China. And really, any country that thinks about violating trade policies or attempts to cheat American workers, that the U.S. will not tolerate such behavior. I appreciate the fact that this can be a bipartisan message. The White House made a very misguided decision when it chose to lift additional tariffs on China for 2 years. That action, in my view, sends the wrong message to the world, particularly when we know, based on findings by the President's own Commerce Department, that China is cheating American workers and consumers by circumventing tariffs right now. We have the opportunity today to act on bipartisan legislation that will turn out the lights on that decision and hold China accountable. To be clear, U.S. purchasers of fairly traded solar products will not pay a single penny of additional tariffs if this resolution is enacted. This is about protecting American workers, American jobs, and holding China accountable. I want to thank my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for introducing this resolution and fighting to protect American workers and American jobs. Mr. Speaker, I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 327, the previous question is ordered. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the joint resolution. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
Resolution disapproving the rules submitted by the Department of Commerce relating to procedures covering suspension of liquidation duties and estimated duties in accord with Presidential Proclamation 10414.
The question is on passage of the joint resolution. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The joint resolution is passed.
Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman seek
I demand
recognition?
the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are ordered. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number have risen. The yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote. Give me the totals. On this vote, the yeas are 221 and the nays are 202. The joint resolution is passed. The motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Go ahead. California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at 11 a.m. on Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023.
Without objection, so ordered. The House will be in order. Will be in order. Now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. Where is she? Does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The House will be in order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlewoman may proceed.
I rise today to commemorate the 48th anniversary of Black April. I am proud to represent Orange County's Little Saigon, which is home to the largest population of Vietnamese in the world outside of Vietnam itself. During Black April, we remember the fall of Saigon, those who served in Vietnam, and those who lost their lives fleeing communism. The fall of Republic of Vietnam is one of the greatest tragedies in modern history. It reminds us that freedom is not free. And it reminds us that we are blessed to live in the greatest country in the world. So today, I invite all of my colleagues to join me and stand with the Vietnamese community in Orange County and across the country during Black April. Thank you. I yield back.
What purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to discuss the importance of treating immigrants in a humane way. In a hearing at Homeland Security recently, we discussed an incredibly offensive collector's coin, or called a challenge coin, being sold online. It depicted a Border Patrol agent on horseback chasing a black Haitian migrant with a whip. The coin celebrated the incident and claimed to be circulating with Border Patrol agents. It disgusted almost everyone in the hearing, except for a prominent MAGA Republican who laughed about it. No one should find the abusive treatment of human beings funny. It is a national embarrassment. These migrants are trying to better their lives and the lives of their families. We need to have an effective immigration policy in this country, but we also need to make sure all migrants, regardless of the status, are treated humanely and fairly. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Its time has expired. For what purposes the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize Gennaro Jewelers of Belmore, New York, as they celebrate 100 years of service to Long Islanders. This renowned local small business has been a cornerstone of the community for 1 century, helping generations of New York neighbors provide wonderful gifts to their loved ones during good times and unfortunately bad. But not only is Gennaro Jewelers known for its fine wares, but under the leadership of my good friend Gary Hughes, the business also continues to give back to the Belmore community and beyond. They are staunch supporters of law enforcement, of firefighters, of first responders, and they are dedicated to keeping those New Yorkers safe each and every day. With this long history of quality service in mind, I congratulate Gennaro Jewelers as they celebrate their 100th year serving the 4th Congressional District. New York's 4th Congressional District is enriched by presence of great businesses like Gennaro Jewelers, and I wish my good friend Gary Hughes and the entire team there much success in the future. Congratulations on 100 years. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am a mother myself. My children are now 27 and 30 years old, but I distinctly remember how challenging it was to have children in a 2-parent working family. I was a lawyer before I came to Congress, and I distinctly remember the panic when I had to bring my very active toddler son to court with me because his preschool was suddenly closed. I really feel for people who have ongoing issues finding affordable, reliable childcare. More than 38,000 children in Pennsylvania are waitlisted, 1,600 classrooms have closed, and hundreds of childcare positions remain unfilled. In my district in the Lehigh Valley, more than 1,500 children are waitlisted, and Carbon County is classified as a child care desert. But the child care crisis isn't just hard on parents, it's hard on child care providers too. Early child care workers in my district make just $28,000 to $32,000 compared with their elementary school peers making $52,000. The Child Care for Working Families Act, introduced yesterday on a bicameral basis, would help open more care providers and lower costs for parents, capping costs at 7% of a family's income. Putting money back in parents' pockets, raising wages for hardworking care providers, and giving kids more quality early childhood education,
time has expired.
That's working for people.
Gentlewoman yields. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to thank and celebrate the 50th birthday and retirement of Ernesto Mendoza for his dedicated service to our community, to protect and to serve the people of Los Angeles. Ernesto served our great country in the United States Army, overseas in Germany, then came home to serve in the Los Angeles Police Department with a combined total of 30 years of service. He consistently operates with integrity and honesty and has established
strong, trusted leadership, retiring as a Detective 3 through various LAPD departments, including 77th Division and most recently, South Bureau. Ernesto, thank you for all that you have done for our community, and thank you for your service to our country. Enjoy your 50th birthday with your family, and I wish you a joyful retirement. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I would request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and
With-
to extend and revise my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to celebrate the incredible work of the John Marshall High School's boys basketball head coach, Ty White. Coach White recently received the Naismith High School Boys Coach of the Year award after leading his team to an undefeated season and the state title in Virginia. The Naismith Awards are presented annually to the most outstanding men's and women's basketball players and coaches who have achieved tremendous success on and off the court. Coach White has spent 13 years coaching the boys basketball team and has served as an invaluable mentor and community leader in the John Marshall High School family. I commend Coach White on his determination, leadership, and grit. He and the John Marshall boys basketball team, the Justices, have made Richmond, our district, and their Congresswoman proud. Go Justices. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The woman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The modern America wants flexibility and choice. However, President Biden and Washington Democrats would rather force their radical labor agenda on the American people. That's why Senator Tim Scott and I introduced the Employee Rights Act, which represents the Republican vision for the future of the American modern workforce. Our bill updates our nation's labor laws by expanding workforce protections for independent contractors, entrepreneurs, franchises, and anyone else looking to learn a living on their own terms and live the American dream. This bill also offers political protections to employees by preventing heavy-handed union leaders from abusing membership dues, as well as ensuring the union election process is conducted by secret ballot, a right guaranteed to every American, so that employees are not intimidated or harassed for the way they vote. Supported by dozens of national, state, and local organizations, I'm proud to introduce this common-sense legislation that ensures workers' rights are protected from partisan union leaders and the heavy hand of this administration. Republicans stand with the 21st century worker, and it's time our labor policies do as well. Every American deserves the freedom to hold a job and not be forced to pay union dues. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
I rise asking unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor the life and legacy of Harry Belafonte, who passed away this week at age 96. This is a hole in the soul of goodness. He broke barriers in Hollywood, becoming one of the first black faces on screen. His unique sound led him to success in the music industry with classics like Day-O or the Banana Boat song and Jamaica Farewell. His artistry spoke to the soul of many black Americans who did not see themselves represented in music or screen. He touched the West Indies diaspora of New York and lent that island sound to his top hits. He had great success with his Calypso album when it topped the charts for 31 weeks straight before a man known as Elvis Presley came on the scene. He also took up the mantle on civil rights to work alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Stokely Carmichael, and others to promote racial equity. He will be remembered as a multi-talented entertainer who shattered barriers while continuing to battle racial justice and help clear the way for those who came after him. May we remember his powerful legacy and his remarkable efforts to progress justice, equality, and civil rights. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Jenny Gentry, who has been selected as the 2023 recipient of the Legacy of Leadership Award from the Girl Scouts of Historic Georgia. The Legacy of Leadership Award honors a woman who is a Girl Scout alum and has made a significant impact in the local community. A native of Atlanta, Jenny made Savannah her home after graduating from college. She joined J.P. Morgan Chase in May of 2019 on the commercial banking team covering the Savannah area and surrounding communities. Since moving to Savannah, Jenny has been active in the community, serving on a number of civic and nonprofit boards. She is currently the board chair for Goodwill Southeast Georgia and has previously served as the board chair of the Savannah Area Chamber of Commerce, YMCA of the Coastal Empire, and United Way. Jenny also serves on the Savannah Community Foundation Board as well as the Chatham-Savannah Homeless Authority. Thank you, Jenny, for your continued dedication to the Savannah community, and congratulations on your well-deserved honor. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of the Green New Deal, which I'm proud to co-sponsor with Senator Markey and Representative Ocasio-Cortez. Now, we are in a climate emergency, and we must work together to fight back and build an economy for everyone. An economy that just doesn't meet the threats of climate change, but also directly invests in our communities. Everyone deserves safe water to drink, clean air to breathe, and a healthy place to live. And right now, we're not just failing the next generation, we're failing Americans today. This impacts all of us, from low-income communities who have been victims of environmental injustice to the millions of people whose livelihoods depend on agriculture. And we must be prepared to lead and understand the link between housing and climate justice. Our cities need active and green public transit and walkable neighborhoods. We can build a sustainable future and create good union jobs. Our country needs a Green New Deal, and I pledge to keep fighting for those values every single day. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Today I rise to recognize and to remember Patricia Sutherland McCree. Patricia Sutherland McCree, a 30-year resident of Vito and a constituent of mine, passed from us earlier this week. Patricia moved to the Space Coast in 1960 to teach at Melbourne High School, where she met a young Army officer who had been mobilized and sent to Florida during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Patricia took her charm and commitment to service with her all over this nation and overseas as an Army spouse. She organized support for families whose husbands were serving in Vietnam alongside her beloved Army husband, Marshall McCree. She mobilized love and comfort for the new widows and fatherless children traumatized by the sudden loss of the servicemen killed in action. Every military base that the Army sent Patricia and Marshall, she was a leader, a servant, and an essential part of the fabric of that community. District of Oviedo, Patricia served as leader of the Oviedo Women's Club, and for many years organized the Great Day in the Country Festival to fundraise for that organization. She made every duty station a better place through her service, and she made Central Florida a better place. My heartfelt condolences to her son-in-law, Congressman Brandon Williams, and his wife in this loss. May God bless her. Rest in peace. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to speak before the House for 1 minute and the ability to revise and extend my remarks.
Yes, ma'am. Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize Workers' Memorial Day, a day where we honor workers who have lost their lives, endured injuries, or become ill due to unsafe working conditions or exposure to chemicals in the workplace. Mary Harris Jones, or some know her better as Mother Jones, was a champion of workers' rights during the Industrial Revolution, and she reminded us to pray for the dead and fight like hell for the living. And that's what we're going to do today and every day, but by not just simply remembering these workers who sacrifice their safety, health, and lives because that is simply not enough. We must continue to fight for safe jobs for all, and I am proud to stand with unions to protect workers' rights. Nearly every health and safety protection working people across our nation have can be traced back to the work of unions. And I can say with confidence, you cannot find a harder working group of people than those in Ohio's 13th Congressional District. We are resilient, dedicated, and determined, and we deserve strong workplace standards to protect the health and safety of our neighbors, co-workers, and families. I will continue to stand with unions in the fight for dignity in the workplace so all Ohioans can feel safe and secure when they go to work each day. I thank all of my colleagues in advance for remembering and recognizing April 28th as Workers' Memorial Day, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize and congratulate Bolanos IGA, a family-owned, legendary establishment in the Cherry Grove section of North Myrtle Beach, on its 75th anniversary. This iconic brand started with the Bolano family in 1948. Today, the Bolano family has 8 different businesses, everything from gas stations to ice cream shops to a seafood restaurant that occupy over 4 square blocks with more than 175,000 square feet of retail shopping. It seems like every corner has a splash of that iconic Bolano red. Local businesses are the heart and soul of my district of South Carolina and indeed the nation. And I'm grateful for the hard work of the families like the Bolanos who are dedicated to serving their communities. It's amazing to see this growth of a hometown business over the course of the last 75 years, and I wish them nothing but success for the next 75 years. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House floor for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized.
Today I rise in support of the bipartisan Protecting Sibling Relationships in Foster Care Act. Several students from my district have written in and asked me to support this essential piece of legislation, and frankly, they have a really good point. We know that CPS investigations and removals are traumatizing for children. When we keep kids together in foster care, we protect them from adverse experiences, provide them with continuity, and help expedite the delivery of services to them at a critical time. Currently, it's estimated that 53 to 80% of these children are separated from one or more of their siblings while in care. This can't continue. There are overwhelming psychological, academic, and operational and humanitarian reasons for supporting this legislation. This bill would increase the placement of siblings together in foster care and encourage the development of programs designed specifically for sibling groups. It's pragmatic, it's bipartisan, and most importantly, it's good for our kids. I call on my colleagues to do right by our children and support this legislation as well. I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentlewoman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
I rise today to recognize the talented and diligent students in our 8th District who participated in our annual Congressional Art Competition. This year, we received 230 submissions from 8 schools. The artwork from these dedicated students is on display at the Pyramid Hill Sculpture Park and Museum until April 30th, and it's available online as well. One standout student received the grand prize victory for her art submission. I'd like to congratulate Paige Harris, who was our grand prize winner of the 2023 8th District Congressional Art Competition. Paige is an 11th grader and attends Baden High School, and her urban renewal work will be placed on display in the United States Capitol for the next year. Last week, I had the honor to meet Paige and her fellow art competition participants and her family as well. We celebrate their hard work, their skills, and the creativity. I thank them all for their participation. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask to address the House.
unanimous consent for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized.
As we approach the month of May, I want to remind everyone that we honor our mothers of this nation. Mothers who have nourished, calmed, encouraged, celebrated, cheered those who have made their way in life. Mothers who've had difficult times, challenges, but yet continued to be there. I want to be able to honor mothers who are taking care of children who are not their own. And in this month of May, I will select mothers from my congressional district and some from around the nation to honor over the month of May and say thank you for what you do. That's why, as well, I voted against the draconian Republican budget that wanted to cut SNAP, supplemental nutrition to help our children, wanted to cut veterans benefits for women veterans who are in desperate need, and wanted to, again, squash women's rights and reproductive rights. Mothers are, in fact, the anchor of this nation, and I celebrate them and will celebrate them in this coming month with cheer, applause, recognition, and honor. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute. If I extend remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, today over 187 million Americans use natural gas, as well as another approximately 50 million use propane because it's affordable, it's available right here in North America. Over half the country uses this product. Over 45 million stoves and ovens, 61 million water heaters, $73 million space heaters use natural gas across the country, which provides consistent, reliable energy for heating and for cooking, etc. Our nation is the largest consumer of natural gas and one of the largest producers of natural gas due to the miracle of hydraulic fracturing. It's an integral part and reliable part of our energy arsenal over the decades. Yet states like California and now the Biden administration can't seem to admit the unreliable alternatives are trying to force upon all of us that they aren't the be-all, end-all. They can't seem to admit that these technologies have not advanced to a point where they can rely on solar or wind, a tiny part of our grid, for all of our needs. Democrats are content to source foreign energy to fill in the gaps where their green energy falls way short. Republicans and other common sense Americans know we need all of the above an energy approach to fill our energy needs. Natural gas, oil, hydropower, geothermal, nuclear, and biomass are all important part of the grid, not just windmills, not just solar panels. We need all the above. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Body for 1 minute without objection.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to commemorate the fall of Saigon, also known as Black April, on April 30th. Today, the Vietnamese American community are business owners, teachers, police officers, American soldiers. The Little Saigon community exemplifies the American dream and has always stood for the land of opportunity. This Sunday marks 47 years since Vietnamese refugees came to America. Today, I also ask my colleagues to remember the 58,000 American soldiers that made the ultimate sacrifice for freedom for Vietnam. Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize Ida DiCaprio in honor of her 90th birthday. Ida and her twin sister, Eleanor, were born on May 10, 1933 in Amsterdam, New York. She worked for New York Telephone, then General Electric after graduating from Wilbur H. Lynch High. In 1956, she gave birth to her daughter, Roberta. An exceptionally hard-working and loving mother, Ida worked a number of jobs over the years while Roberta was in school, including those at Mohasco, Miles Catering, and Lorenzo's on Union Street, before working alongside her twin sister at Travelers Insurance. She joined St. Mary's Hospital Auxiliary in 2006 and around the same time began volunteering in human resources, where she secured employment and continues to work to this day. Congratulations, Ita, on many decades of committed service to the community, and a happy 90th birthday to Edie. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to highlight the Halawa Saponi tribe. The tribe has over 4,000 members living in the 1st Congressional District of North Carolina. The tribe, led by their fearless chief, Richardson, welcomed people near and far as they celebrated 58 years of state recognition. Mr. Speaker, I had the honor of attending the Halawa Saponi powwow in Hollister, one of the largest powwows in the state. The powwow, the first in 3 years because of COVID, celebrates a rich history and strong cultural heritage filled with traditions passed down from generation to generation. Mr. Speaker, I'm thrilled to announce that I will soon introduce legislation calling for their federal recognition. I yield back.
Yields. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Hawaii seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, I voted against the Default on America Act, a reckless debt limit proposal that would force Americans to suffer through pandemic-level economic pain once again because of brutal spending cuts put forth by House Republicans. The Default on America Act would buy us less than a year's reprieve from default on the backs of hard-working American families, keiki, kupuna, and veterans. 22% across-the-board cuts for critical safety net programs would mean 13 million fewer health visits for our veterans. 300,000 children would lose Head Start slots and families access to child care. 1 million seniors would get kicked off of Meals on Wheels, and the list goes on. We need to put people over politics. We cannot afford to gamble with the lives and livelihoods of everyday Americans. Instead of these pilau rotten cuts, we should be focused on ending child hunger, keeping people housed, taking care of our kupuna, and improving access to veterans services. The Treasury says we have less than 60 days until our nation is expected to default on our loans. America is waiting for us to do the right thing and pass a clean debt limit increase now. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. The chair lays before the House a communication.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., April 28, 2023. I hereby designate the period from Saturday, April 29, 2023, through Monday, May 8, 2023, as a district work period under Section 3Z of House Resolution 5. Signed, Kevin McCarthy, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the minority leader. You're recognized.
And still I rise, Mr. Speaker. And I rise today as a proud descendant of the enslaved people who are the foundational mothers and fathers of our country. They are the persons who laid the economic foundation that we all reside upon today. And Mr. Speaker, I rise today to give an update on the conscience agenda. I rise to give an update because we've had something new that we have to add to the agenda. Previously, we've announced that the agenda would consist of expanding a Slavery Remembrance Day. August 20th of 1619 is a day that will live in infamy. It was a seminal moment in time for this country because it was on that day that persons upon a ship, the White Lion, docked at a place called Point Comfort near what we now call Norfolk, Virginia. On that ship were persons of African ancestry. The first 20 Africans, there may be some debate as to the number, but approximately 20 is what is recorded in most places, it seems. first 20 Africans who were traded for goods, they became the first enslaved people in this country. August 20th of 1619, a day that was a seminal moment then and a seminal moment now because of the impact that it has had on our country. Slavery should be remembered. We have a Holocaust Remembrance Day, and I completely, absolutely, and totally support it. I was at the Holocaust Remembrance Ceremony just recently, where we commemorated those persons who were victims of the Holocaust. We have a 9/11 Remembrance Day. We have a Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day. We must have a Slavery Remembrance Day. I'm proud to let the world know that this House of Representatives did pass a resolution commemorating slavery remembrance. It did not make it through the Senate, but the House did pass it. I'm also honored to say that our president, the Honorable Joe Biden, recognized Slavery Remembrance Day with a press release. And last year in Houston, Texas, we had an official Slavery Remembrance Day commemoration breakfast. And at that breakfast, we had over 1,000 people in attendance. We will have another such breakfast on August 20th of this year. Slavery Remembrance Day is a part of the conscience agenda. We also have on the conscience agenda the awarding of a Congressional Gold Medal to the enslaved Americans of African ancestry, a Congressional Gold Medal to them. Why? Because in this country, we have reviled the enslaved and revered the enslavers. In this country, we've named military bases and schools after enslavers. We've not done such things to any great degree that I'm aware of for the enslaved persons. We revere the enslavers and revile the enslaved. And there is something a little bit more sinister associated with this. It is the notion that there seems to be an expectation that the descendants of the enslaved behave as perfect victims. Behave as perfect victims. Allow your ancestors to be dishonored. Allow them to be disrespected. Be the perfect victim. Allow schools that you send your children to be named after enslavers. Allow military bases that your young people will go to and serve when serving in the military. Do this and don't complain. Don't complain. It's okay. After all, they were the enslaved. But we will salute, revere, and give great honor, lionize those who were the enslavers. Something sinister about that, expecting the descendants to appreciate the revering of the enslaved while reviling revering the enslavers while reviling the enslaved. Something sinister about it. It boggles the mind. I refuse to be a perfect victim. I'm not going to honor the enslavers, and I think that we should honor the enslaved. This is why we're asking this Congress to award a Congressional Gold Medal to the enslaved. They are the people who helped construct this very facility that we're in. They're the people who, with their humble hands, helped to erect the White House and build it. They're the people who built roads and bridges, planted the crops, harvested the crops, fed the nation. Many of them were born into slavery. Babies were enslaved in this country. Babies lived as children in slavery and died as slaves. hundreds of years, and people expect the Al Greens of the world to be perfect victims. Just accept it. I refuse to be a perfect victim. This is why I'm asking for a Congressional Gold Medal for the enslaved persons who are the foundational mothers and fathers of this country. There's another reason for asking. We in 1956 awarded a Congressional Gold Medal to the enslavers. The Confederate soldiers were awarded a Congressional Gold Medal. No such thing for the people who built the country. Lives were sacrificed so that we could have this economic power that we have today. By the way, I love my country. I sing the national anthem. I stand. I say the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm not a person who, with some great degree of disdain, disrespects the flag. I don't do it. But I will say this, the greatness of America will not be measured by whether I salute the flag or sing the national anthem. The greatness of America is measured by whether I will stand up for the rights of those who choose not to salute the flag, who choose not to sing the national anthem. And I do. I stand up for them. But I would want you to know that if we can, as we did in 1956, give a Congressional Gold Medal, excuse me, to the enslavers, surely we can accord a Congressional Gold Medal to the enslaved. Just as we have done it for those who would have kept them in bondage, we can do it for those persons whose lives were sacrificed such that we would have this facility, such that we would have the economic engine that we have today. So we've asked for the Congressional Gold Medal. We have also noted that Richard Russell, a self-proclaimed white supremacist, Richard Russell's name is on the Senate Russell Office Building. Self-proclaimed white supremacist. Richard Russell fought anti-lynching legislation that we just passed in this Congress, in the last Congress, not this Congress, but the last. Self-proclaimed, fought integration. One of the authors of the Southern Manifesto, Richard Russell. His name is on the Russell Senate Office Building. That's the Richard Russell. His name ought not be there. The Richard Russell Office Building, I will remove this momentarily, is a symbol of national shame. These are the enslaved persons who were brought here, a depiction of them in 1619. The Richard Russell Building is a symbol of national shame. The Senate has been in the process of, along with this House, of taking the names of Confederate soldiers off of military bases. But that same Senate will not remove the name of Richard Russell from a building that it resides in. The Richard Russell Office Building, a symbol of national shame. I do not enter the Richard Russell Office Building. I have enough respect for myself. I'm not a perfect victim. I am a one-person protest. It is better to stand alone on some questions than not stand at all. And I don't have any problem with standing alone when it comes to this facility. Richard Russell has a rotunda in this facility devoted to him with a statue of Richard Russell. The Richard Russell, the self-proclaimed white supremacist, the same one that fought integration, the same Richard Russell who authored or co-authored the Southern Manifesto, a building named after a racist, bigot, self-proclaimed white supremacist. his name needs to come off of that building. It should revert to the name that it had before his name was placed on it, which was the old Senate office building. And if we'd like to name it something more, we can. But the Senate is participating in the shaming of the nation by allowing this name to stay on this building. The Senate but only has to have the will to remove the name, the same will that it had when it decided that we would take the names of Confederate soldiers off of military bases. If the Senate can take the names of Confederate soldiers off of military bases, surely it can acquire the will to remove Richard Russell's name from a building that the Senate has control over. It's a symbol of national shame. So now to the update. Not only is Richard Russell's name on the Senate office building, his name is also on legislation. I'm not the perfect victim. His name is on legislation. I have a piece of legislation in my hand that bears the name of Richard Russell. I will not single this piece of legislation out because there are other pieces. And the substance of the legislation I have no quarrel with. But I do take issue with having legislation named after a person, in honor of a person who is a self-proclaimed white supremacist, in honor of a person who fought anti-lynching legislation, same person who co-authored the Southern Manifesto. I refuse to allow it. I will not participate in it, and his name should be removed from the Russell Senate office building. This piece of legislation, as I have indicated, bears his name. It is the Richard B. Russell National School Lunch Program. His name shouldn't be on a school lunch program. It shouldn't. I can think of some other names that would be removed immediately, if not sooner, if they were on a school lunch program. I can. His name should be removed. So I'm filing legislation, this is the update, to have Richard Russell's name removed from all legislation that happens to bear it currently. All legislation. And to never have his name listed again. He is a symbol of national shame. His name should be removed. I refuse to be the perfect victim. The expectation that I don't respect myself enough to stand up for myself. And what's so ironic about this, and really it breaks my heart, to just know that there are people who know this. They know this. People of color, African ancestry, they know this. And they still frequent the Richard Russell office building, a symbol of national shame. At some point, my dear friends, we have to cease to be the perfect victim and allow others to expect and ourselves to participate in the shaming of our ancestors and the treatment that African Americans have received in this country by a Richard Russell having a building named in its honor. We have to remove his name. This agenda also includes some other things. That was the update, but let's go ahead and refresh memories now. We have another item on the agenda, and that is enacting the Securities and Exchange Atonement Act. Securities and Exchange Atonement Act. Friends, I had the honor, the singular honor, of serving as the chairperson of the Oversight Subcommittee on the Financial Services Full Committee. I did so under the leadership of the Honorable Maxine Waters. And under her leadership, we found that there are banks in this country, the big banks, the major banks. These banks, through their predecessor institutions, these banks literally made loans so that masters, as they were called, could buy slaves, enslaved people. So they would buy them. And if the master did not make the payments, defaulted, the bank repossessed the people, treated them as chattels. I refuse to be the perfect victim. That this behavior necessitates atonement. We need to do what this legislation will call for, and that is, let's do the research. Let's find out which of these banks benefited from this institution of slavery because they made a profit when they made these loans, and they need to atone. That's what this legislation is all about. But we also found out that the major insurance companies, they insured human beings as chattels. And when the master's chattel, the human being that was enslaved, had some death that was one that would require the master to be compensated, the master received payment for the death of an enslaved person. This has to change. There has to be some atonement for this. That's what this Securities and Exchange Atonement Act is all about. And the last thing on the agenda currently is the establishing of the Department of Reconciliation. To get all of these things done requires reconciliation. But reconciliation is bigger than the institution of slavery. There are others who necessitate reconciliation as well. An example would be the indigenous population, the persons who were here when the Europeans arrived. The indigenous population, those persons who suffered what we call the Trail of Tears, literally uprooted from their homes, forced to move across country simply because others wanted their land. So they just took it, forced them to move. Many died along the way. We need to reconcile for this. And then there were the persons who were placed in these camps when we were at war with Japan. Their homes lost, property lost. We need to reconcile. There is reconciliation that must be had, and this department would help us do this. We have right now a Department of Labor to deal with labor issues, and we have a Secretary of Labor. The Secretary of Labor reports directly to the President. We have a Department of Commerce to deal with issues associated with commerce, and the Secretary of Commerce reports to the President. We need a Department of Reconciliation with a Secretary of Reconciliation and undersecretaries of reconciliation to deal with all these various areas that need to be reconciled, and that person should report directly to the President. Reconciliation is not going to occur over one presidency. It's not going to occur in a few years. It may take decades, but we will have the department to get it done. Just as we are going to keep a Department of Commerce, we should have and maintain, keep, if you will, a Department of Reconciliation. It is absolutely necessary for us to do this. And if we should do so, we can also deal with some other issues that require reconciliation. This is the way a great nation should respond, a nation that requires liberty and justice for all. That is what is in our Pledge of Allegiance. A nation founded on the notion that all persons are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is what this nation was founded on. We have to live up to the promise in the pledge. Live up to the words in the Declaration of Independence. We have a duty and a responsibility to posterity to correct the injustices that were perpetrated. And I have a duty and a responsibility to myself to decline to be the perfect victim. So I rise and I stand in this, the well of the house, not the perfect victim, but as a proud descendant of the enslaved people who helped construct this very facility. And I do so knowing that there will be resistance to what I do. But I do so knowing that that resistance cannot withstand the bending of the arc of the moral universe toward justice for the enslaved people who are the foundational mothers and fathers of this country. I am proud to be a descendant of these enslaved people. And I yield back the balance of my time. Mr. Speaker, pardon me, with your consent and permission, I'd now like to yield such time as he may consume to Mr. Takano, a dear friend from the great state of California.
The gentleman yields. Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman from Texas for yielding. I certainly share his commitment, and I share your pride. I know you stand for justice. I know you stand for the cause of all folks who have been marginalized, and I know for your commitment to our service members during World War II. But Mr. Chairman, I would like to take, Mr. Speaker, at this moment, I'd like to take a moment to thank a member of my staff on the House Committee on Veterans Affairs for his valued service to veterans, this Congress, and our country. Miguel Salazar joined our committee as our communications director in 2019 as Democrats took back the House, and was an integral part of the committee's efforts to deliver meaningful change for our nation's veterans. When my Honoring Our Pact Act was signed into law last year, Miguel worked tirelessly with our communications team to ensure that the 3.5 million newly eligible veterans became aware of the benefits they were entitled to. As a commissioned officer in the Marine Corps Reserve, Miguel has embodied the very best of public service. He has been a true leader and an invaluable member of my staff. The work of my committee and this legislative body have been made better by Miguel's contributions, and he will be deeply missed, and I yield back.
I compliment the gentleman for recognizing a staffer. This is what I would expect from you, to be quite honest. You have demonstrated in your years in Congress a desire to see that all people are treated fairly, and you have not only demonstrated a desire, but you've actually demonstrated it by way of a voting record that evidences the will to see that it's done. So I compliment you, and it's what I would expect you
Would the gentleman yield?
Of course,
I was trying to remember your cause, which was the Merchant Marines.
Mariners, yes,
Merchant Mariners during World War II. I was at an event with Senator McConnell, which commemorated the service of these merchant mariners who played such a critical role serving our nation during World War II. They weren't in uniform, but they died at tremendous numbers. And I share your concern, Mr. Green, that we need to do something for these surviving merchant mariners before they all die. They served our country in an incredible way.
Well, thank you for that. And I also would thank you for helping us to shepherd it through the House in the last Congress. We didn't get it through the Senate, but it got through the House because of your hands, and I appreciate it.
You're welcome,
Thank you
sir.
much.
Thank you.
And Mr. Speaker, before I yield the floor, following the example of my colleague, I would like to commend an employee, actually an intern, who has worked in our office and has been of great service to us. Because this is an intern, I won't give the full name, but her first name is quite similar to my name. My name is Alexander. Most people know me as Al. Hers is Alex. And Alex is with us today. She is a person that, quite frankly, has matured beyond her years and has rendered a great service to our country. So Alex, thank you very much for your service to your country. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the departure of Marty Walsh from the Labor Department, President Biden has nominated Deputy Secretary Julie Su to succeed him. For those of us in California, this decision was very hard to understand. Ms. Su's record as our state's labor secretary under Governor Gavin Newsom is well known because it had such negative consequences for so many people. Having seen my constituents suffer at the hands of Ms. Su's mismanagement and anti-worker agenda, I have felt compelled to make sure the facts come to light in the confirmation process. As chair of the House Subcommittee on Workforce Protections, I held a hearing last week highlighting the countless livelihoods she destroyed as Secretary of Labor in California. You see, I don't want the rest of the country to suffer in the way California has. Our state had the highest unemployment rate through much of the COVID era. We have the nation's highest poverty rate. In recent years, we have been last in the country in income growth and first in the country in U-Haul rentals. I'm joined today by several colleagues who don't want this for their states and for the rest of the country. So they've joined us here for this special order to discuss what a Julie Su-led Labor Department would mean for their constituents and to urge President Biden to withdraw this nomination. So I'd like to begin by yielding to my friend from Texas, Representative Moran.
Thank you to my friend, Mr. Kiley from California, for gathering us here today for something very important, to speak out against President Biden's nomination of Julie Su to be the next United States Secretary of Labor. As a former Republican member of the California legislature, Mr. Kiley knows all too well why this should not happen, and the rest of the country should take notice. As a former small business owner, I also understand why this should not happen because I understand both the needs of the employer and the employee, and have seen firsthand how empowering your employees is a leading factor in overall success of a business, and how managing with wise and prudent decision-making is the right way to go. That is something that Julie Su has not done and has proven that during her time in California and here in Washington, D.C. During her time as Secretary of the California Labor and Workforce Development Agency, she repeatedly put big businesses and their wants ahead of the needs and concerns of workers. And in fact, she put unions ahead of the rights and the needs of workers. During this time, she championed California Assembly Bill 5, which reclassified independent contractors, harming them by considering them employees, and in fact taking that ability to be independent contractors away from many categories of workers that were intending to build their businesses and to build their lives. In doing so, it forced them into these formal employment relationships intended for no other purpose, and I want to pause there, for no other purpose than to drive up union enrollment. She's simply doing the bidding of big unions. On top of this, during the pandemic, Ms. Su's office facilitated the distribution of more than $30 billion in fraudulent claims, the largest exhibition of fraud in California's state history. When we look at what we want out of a labor secretary, we certainly want wisdom, and we want the ability to manage the department. And neither of those is present as characteristics in Ms. Su. I'm deeply concerned about the fate of hardworking Americans under the direction of Julie Su as Secretary of Labor. She does not understand the needs of workers, the responsibilities of employers, and has repeatedly demonstrated, as I mentioned, poor judgment in her official capacity. To try to dissolve the ability for workers to have that independent contractor relationship is simply misguided. Unfortunately, Julie Su is just another example of the Biden administration nominating someone who is neither qualified nor possessive of the right judgment to lead a department. Rather than work towards enacting meaningful policy that will benefit all Americans, the Biden administration continues to nominate individuals like Ms. Su who are certain to enact the president's liberal agenda and propose policies, allowing him and his administration to bypass Congress and to bypass the American people. The misguided policies executed in California under Ms. Su when she was Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development there do not reflect the needs or the wishes of the East Texans that I represent, nor Americans as a whole. So I urge my colleagues in the Senate to reject the nomination of Julie Su for Labor Secretary. I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back to Mr. Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Moran, and you really hit the nail on the head that if this nomination goes through, it is hardworking Americans, millions of American workers who will pay the price. I'd next like to yield to the representative from Virginia, Mr. Good.
Thank you, Congressman Kiley, for hosting this special order. Julie Su has already auditioned for the job as Secretary of Labor, failing miserably and proving beyond a reasonable doubt that she is unfit for the position. For 2 years now, Ms. Su has been second in command at the Department of Labor, and all we need to do is look at the rules and regulations that have been issued under her watch. Her Department of Labor has incentivized and pressured retirement plans to focus on woke ESG guidelines instead of making investment decisions based on return on investment. Her DOL has undermined the right of religious organizations to hire according to their beliefs if they want to participate in federal contracts, discriminating against them and essentially violating their civil rights. Her DOL has redefined the definition of joint employers to harm the independence of franchisees. Her DOL has undercut independent contractors to make the federal government more like California. Yeah, that's what we want to do. That's the example we want to follow. And then maybe people will start fleeing the United States the way they're fleeing California today. Her DOL has raised the minimum wage for employers on federal contracts to $15 an hour. And while she was the Labor Secretary in California, she ignored the warnings from the United States Department of Labor to improve fraud protection against the jobless benefit payments she was issuing. And this is coming from the Biden administration, who wants to give as many benefits to as many individuals as possible with essentially no verification of qualifications. Of course, in this administration of failing forward, instead of being reprimanded, she's being considered for a promotion to the nation's top labor job. But we all know who Julie Su is. We know that she will take her orders from anti-American big labor and further assault right to work. So all senators who value small businesses and workers' rights should oppose her nomination. And I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Good. And, your point about making the rest of the country like California, that is explicitly what they're trying to do here. President Biden has cited the labor law that Julie Su was in charge of enforcing in California as his model for labor relations nationwide. And in fact, the Labor Department is now trying to emulate it in order to cause the same harm for all American workers that California workers have already suffered. I'd next like to yield to the representative from Illinois, Congresswoman Miller.
Thank you, Congressman Kiley, for hosting the special order to oppose Deputy Secretary Su as the next Secretary of Labor. The Biden administration's radical Department of Labor attempted to unconstitutionally fire 84 million Americans unless they took the COVID vaccine and handed over their personal medical files to prove it. Under Joe Biden's leadership, the federal government has been weaponized to go after American workers, causing permanent damage to small businesses and the lives of working Americans. As Vice Chair of the House Committee on Education and the Workforce, I support a full oversight investigation to hold the Biden administration and Deputy Secretary Sue accountable over OSHA's unconstitutional and illegal COVID vaccine mandate. My constituents miss having a booming economy full of good jobs and a president who supports working families. In Congress, I will always defend hardworking Americans from leftists who want to strip away our freedoms and our ability to provide for our families. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Miller, and that brings up a very important point. Then with everything that's been going on with the economy, everything that happened during COVID, it really is stunning that you had people in positions of power like Julie Su who are looking for reasons to deny people the opportunity to work. I'd next like to yield to my friend from Utah, also part of the Education and Workforce Committee, Representative Owens.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. I rise today in opposition to the nomination of Julie Su for the U.S. Labor Secretary. I've always been told you can get some idea of a person's future judgment and skill based on their past judgments and skill. Ms. Su has a history that's very instructive. It was during her tenure as Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development Agency in California that put the Golden State on a fast track to bankruptcy and economic collapse. Because of Ms. Su's leadership, hundreds of business headquarters have fled the state. Between 2020 and 2022, over 500,000 Californians have left the state for greener pastures. As an executive, the primary responsibility for any state that you're representing is you should be growing it, not expelling your citizens. Ms. Su's reign has shown a failure in both judgment and skills. Under her watch, over $31 billion of California's COVID funds was delivered to bank accounts of fraudsters. At the same time, delays and red tape plagued legitimate COVID relief claims, those who desperately needed it. Caving to the demands of union bosses, Ms. Su has been and will continue to be totally tone deaf to business owners, never understanding Americans who build our nation's tax base, who power our middle class, who pays her salary, and who through robust employment is a source of union dues. She literally turned her back on the goose that lays the golden egg, the California's risk-taking business owners. At the behest of the union bosses, she instead launched an all-out assault on independent contractors critical to the success of the gig economy. At every government post Ms. Su has been appointed to, she has prioritized non-revenue producers, the union bosses, and unelected bureaucrats. Her priority has always been with those who empty the government coffers instead of those small business owners who through work, risk, expansion, paying their taxes, replenishes it. After forcing Californians who can't afford it to leave, the Democratic-controlled legislation then figured a way to tax departing citizens several years after the taxpayer's departure. Sad that this wisdom and creativity wasn't used on the front end to keep them from leaving instead. Unsurprisingly, the Biden administration plans to continue its disastrous anti-growth, anti-small business policies under the leadership of Ms. Su. American families and workforce are hurting from 40-year record inflation, supply chain disruptions, and high energy prices. Ms. Su is not the right person to tackle Americans' pressing economic challenges. I call on the White House to withdraw Julie Su from the confirmation process for Secretary of Labor and prioritize America's families, the workforce, and economic growth. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Owens, for those very on-point remarks. You said it very well, that this nominee is anti-business and anti-growth, and anti-worker as well. And I think it's important for us to have a sense of perspective here, that this is such a vital moment, a moment of vital importance for the American workforce. We're coming out of an era of unprecedented upheaval, and we're heading towards an era of, in many ways, unpredictable transformation. So for the top labor position in America, we need a secretary who is competent and qualified, who is pro-worker and pro-small business, who will work with Democrats and Republicans alike, who is fair and who understands what has made the American workforce the greatest engine for human progress the world has ever known. Simply put, Julie Su is not that person. Her record in California makes that all too clear. Indeed, during the pandemic, Julie Su and her Employment Development Department, known as the EDD, became the national poster child for government failure. I saw this firsthand as a state representative. Millions of Californians had their legitimate unemployment claims wrongfully withheld for weeks, months, or sometimes indefinitely under Sue's mismanagement. And you don't need to take my word for that. In July of 2020, 61 of the 80 members of the California Assembly, mostly Democrats, wrote the following: "In our 5th month of the pandemic, with so many constituents yet to receive a single unemployment payment, it's clear that EDD is failing California. Millions of our constituents have had no income for months. As Californians wait for answers from EDD, they have depleted their life savings, have gone into extreme debt, and are in deep panic as they figure out how to put food on the table and a roof over their heads." The lawmakers went on to explain how the EDD, under Sue's management, time and again failed to take responsibility and failed to correct its mistakes. They wrote that they had been met with long-winded excuses, fumbling non-answers, or unclear and inconsistent data, along with a lack of transparency and accountability. Even, they said, obfuscation and dishonesty in their dealings with Sue's agency. "We have exhausted all avenues at our disposal," they said, as the agency had addressed only a few of the many issues we have highlighted for months and was only, quote, scratching the surface of the disaster that is EDD. The disaster. That's how the California Democrat supermajority characterized Julie Sue's agency. The frustrated legislators lamented how little has improved at EDD over the course of the pandemic. Independent reports confirmed the extent of mismanagement and deception from Sue's agency. Well, the EDD had said in July of 2020 that its claims backlog would be cleared by September. A report found 1.5 million claims remained unresolved, and the backlog was increasing by 10,000 each week. The Independent Legislative Analyst's Office likewise found the EDD mischaracterized the crisis. Even allies of the governor and Secretary Su concluded that she was responsible for this. Democrat Assembly member Cotty Petrie Norris, who is chairwoman of the Assembly Accountability and Administrative Review Committee responsible for overseeing the EDD, said that Su, quote, has not done a good job at running the Employment Development Department, saying Sue's mismanagement, quote, caused heartache for millions of Californians. That is the top Democrat on the committee that oversaw her work in California, saying she did not do a good job at running the Employment Development Department. What reason is there to think she's going to do a good job then running the U.S. Labor Department? But it gets much worse. As so many hardworking citizens waited in vain for their checks in California after they were told they weren't allowed to work during the COVID shutdowns, as these folks who were entitled to their checks waited for them, one group seemed to have no trouble at all getting benefits, and that was people who were not entitled to them, who perpetrated a massive fraud against the state government of California. In fact, it was the largest fraud of taxpayer dollars in history. An estimated $32 billion was wrongfully paid out from the EDD to state prison inmates, international crime syndicates, and other criminals. Payments were made to murderers, rapists, child molesters. 133 death row inmates received over $400,000 alone. These hardened criminals didn't have to try hard. They used names like Dianne Feinstein and John Doe. The district attorney of Sacramento County called the scheme, quote, relatively easy. And the individual most responsible, once again, was Secretary Julie Su. She made the inexplicable decision to forego a basic fraud detection prevention system. She ignored the federal government's guidance that claims be cross-checked against the prison rolls, which was standard practice in other states. The agency sent hundreds of benefit cards to the same address, sent cards directly to correctional facilities, issued benefits to infants and centenarians. A January 2021 report from the California State Auditor notes that the EDD fraud occurred for three main reasons. First, EDD waited about 4 months to automate a key anti-fraud measure. Second, EDD allowed claimants to collect benefits even though they were using suspicious addresses. And third, EDD removed a key safeguard against improper payments without fully understanding the significance of the safeguard. But perhaps worst of all is that Julie Su has refused to accept responsibility. Just last week, at her Senate confirmation hearing, she said that as soon as we knew there was fraud happening, I shut the front door to that fraud. That's her testimony just last week. As soon as we knew there was fraud happening, I shut the front door to that fraud. And yet, California's independent state auditor has found that, quote, despite repeated warnings, EDD did not bolster its fraud detection efforts until months into the pandemic. There is no predicting what will happen to our country, to our workforce, if that level of mismanagement is brought to the U.S. Department of Labor. And I'd like to discuss one more facet of Ms. Su's tenure in California. But before doing so, I'd like to yield to my friend from Georgia, Representative McCormick.
Thank you to my colleague. I, too, have my major concerns about this nomination. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition of President Biden's nominee for Secretary of Labor, Julie Su. America's Labor Secretary should defend both American workers and understand the economy, which provides jobs, feeds families, and keeps our communities strong. Unfortunately, Ms. Su oversaw and distributed of about $32.6 billion in fraudulent unemployment claims paid out to death row inmates, international criminal syndicates, and other fraudsters. She has tried and failed to obscure this fact in front of the Senate committee. While she was doing this, Su also denied or delayed over 5 million legitimate unemployment insurance claims. She was also an architect and key enforcer in California law that effectively outlaws freelance work in California, destroying the livelihoods of thousands of families. Our nation's 1099 employees are just as important to this country as the liberal elite donors that are so set on destroying the American working class. The facts are clear. President Biden should pick someone else to be his labor secretary. I urge my colleagues in the United States Senate to stand with Americans' workers, to stand for American prosperity, and to stand for a better nominee for the Department of Labor. And with that, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. And indeed, the president should pick someone else, almost anyone else. That's what's so really puzzling, mind-boggling about this nomination, is that the president has chosen to elevate the one person in the country who presided over a fraud on this scale. It's the single worst performing Secretary of Labor of any state in the country. And so why would he do that? And that brings us to the final facet of Ms. Su's tenure that I wish to discuss and that Mr. McCormick touched upon as well, which is her ruthless enforcement of the labor law known as AB 5, which President Biden has cited as his model for the nation. So Su's historic failure to deliver unemployment checks to millions of Californians, along with her allowance of this massive fraud, is disqualifying in its own right. But I actually think it is her mistreatment of California workers that is most concerning of all. So AB 5 was a law passed in California in 2019. It rendered countless independent professionals unable to earn a living in our state. Writers, interpreters, court reporters, musicians, language pathologists, photographers, forensic nurses, people in literally hundreds of other professions were told they were no longer allowed to practice their profession and serve their clients as they'd been doing their whole careers. Instead, their only option was to find a single hiring entity to monopolize their services and make them a W-2 employee. But for many, that simply was not possible, and so they lost everything. Take, for example, a woman named Jody, who said, "I worked years to gain my skills in American Sign Language interpreter. It was my goal since I was 9 years old. After AB 5, I lost all 3 of my agencies. The dream I worked for is lost. I can't provide for my family, and thousands of California deaf won't be serviced." Or Andy, who said, I work with underserved artists of color. None of my career as an artist, technician, designer, and producer would have been possible under AB 5. Artists of color will be less able to create their own work in a field that doesn't favor them. Jared said, AB 5 forced me to shut down my business. I went from making $80,000 a year in home services to a minimum wage employee. My family trade is gone. I've gone from working 4 days a week to spend time with my kids to not knowing if I can make ends meet working 7 days. Kathy said, I'm a 71-year-old transcriber. I raised 6 kids and went to work in my 40s, but I had to retire at 62 due to health issues. I depend on my at-home transcription pay to survive and pay my bills. For 8 years, I did okay until AB 5. Julie Su has been called an architect of this law, and she is supporting a federal version that is estimated to cost millions of American workers their livelihoods. After her enactment in California, and this is the important thing given that this is now percolating up into federal law, she used her position as labor secretary to broaden the destructive impact of the law by enforcing it as aggressively as possible. And in fact, and this is maybe the most, I think, concerning thing, is that she exploited the COVID-19 shutdowns to hammer the law in even more. She continued with harassing audits, trying to find businesses to hit with fines and penalties. I personally asked the EDD to stop doing this during the COVID shutdowns, and they refused to do so, continuing to target small businesses. And then she even defied the will of Congress in the process. Congress had provided benefits to independent contractors through the CARES Act, but put states in charge of distributing those benefits. Yet under Julie Su, the EDD wrongfully withheld those benefits as she aimed to exploit the sudden need that independent contractors had to interface with her department. She wanted them to go through the regular unemployment channel, which they weren't supposed to go through, so that she could get access to information that could be used then to conduct more audits and to go after more small businesses and to put more people out of work. And you don't need to take my word for this either. California Congressman Adam Schiff wrote a letter to Secretary Su in April of 2020 rebuking her for failing to release the benefits independent contractors were owed under the CARES Act and requesting urgently that she do so. Now, tellingly, with Julie Su's confirmation for Secretary of Labor now it appears in doubt, her backers are making a last-ditch attempt to save her nomination by absurdly trying to dissociate her from AB 5. None other than the author of AB 5 itself, a major Su backer who now leads the California Labor Federation, told the LA Times that Su, quote, was not involved with the bill at all. Yet Su, in her own words, after the law was passed, described in detail her plans for enforcing AB 5 as California Labor Secretary. We will be doing investigations and audits, she said, threatening fines and penalties, so that those who want to comply with the need to reclassify can do so, and those who don't will understand that's not the kind of economy we want in California. Not the kind of economy we want in California. Those are her words. Julie Su didn't want an economy in California where you can pursue your own calling, support your family on your own terms, and thrive. She doesn't want that for America either. That's why Joe Biden has selected her for Labor Secretary, to wage his war on independent contractors, and we simply cannot let that happen. Now, in closing, there are many, many organizations across the country who have expressed their opposition to the nomination and confirmation of Julie Su for Labor Secretary. I'll just list some of them. There's the Air Conditioning Contractors of America, America Hotel and Lodging Association, American Trucking Association, Americans for Tax Reform, Associated Builders and Contractors, Association of Bi-State Motor Carriers, Center for the Defense of Free Enterprise, Coalition of Franchisee Associations, Consumer Technology Association, Franchise Business Services, Flex Association, Heating, Air Conditioning, and Refrigeration Distributors International, Independent Bakers Association, Independent Electrical Contractors, Institute for the American Worker, International Franchise Association, International Warehouse Logistics Association, Independent Professionals and Self-Employed, Association of Leading Builders of America, National Armored Car Association, National Association of Home Builders, National Association of Wholesaler Distributors, National Council of Chain Restaurants, National Federation of Independent Business, National Franchisee Association, International Franchise Association, National Grocers Association, National Ready Mixed Concrete Association, National Restaurant Association, Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association, DoorDash, Lyft, Competitive Enterprise Institute, TechNet, Fight for Freelancers, Freelancers Against AB5, California Business and Industrial Alliance, Workplace Policy Institute, Job Creators Network, Institute for the American Worker. You've also had state-level associations weigh in opposition. For example, in Arizona, the Builders Alliance, Construction Trades, Franchise Action Network, Lodging and Tourism Association, Restaurant Association, Small Business Association, Transportation Builders Association, Trucking Association, Independent Electrical Contractors. Or in West Virginia, you have the Associated Builders and Contractors, Independent Electrical Contractors of Chesapeake, the Franchise Action Network, the Hospitality and Travel Association, the Manufacturers Association, Oil Marketers and Grocers Association, Retailers Association, and Trucking Association. So I encourage members of the United States Senate to join this broad coalition of small businesses, of workers across the country who know that we deserve and need better in a Secretary of Labor. I urge members of the United States Senate to reject this nomination, and I urge the President to appoint a Secretary of Labor who will be on the side of American workers. Thank you, and I yield back.
Does the gentleman actually yield back?
Sorry, I yield to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Duncan.
The gentleman yields.
That's what you call just making it just in time. I want to thank the gentleman from California for yielding just a little time in this special order hour in order for me to recognize a very special group of students down in Clinton, South Carolina. So, Mr. Speaker, I today want to recognize the Clinton High School and Clinton Middle School Olympiad teams for both bringing home the state championship in Charleston this past month and qualifying for the National Science Olympiad tournament in Kansas this May. Now, this Science Olympiad was founded in 1984 as the premier team STEM competition in the nation and provides standards-based challenges to 6,000 teams at 425 tournaments in all 50 states. Winning the State Olympiad is a tremendous accomplishment alone, but the fact that Clinton has a history of excellence in the Science Olympiad is even more impressive. Listen to this. Clinton's been involved in Olympiad since 1986, and I'm proud that Clinton's continued success in this competition. The Clinton Middle School, formerly Bell Street Middle School, where my sons went to middle school, has won the State Olympiad title 19 times in the last 21 years. 19 times in the last 21 years, and Clinton High School has won the state title 12 of the last 15 years. I'd like to congratulate the coaches and members of the Clinton State Championship Science Olympiad team for their win this year and applaud them for their wins over the years. This year's middle school team included Jackie Alcudia, Liam Bell, Madison Boiter, Lauren Ficklin, Sam Hunt, Salim Jenkins, Jacob King, Matthew King, Shane Kiselak, Hank Lanford, Landon Lohman, Kelly Nelson, Sidney Nelson, Arroyo Patel, Shrey Patel, Ada Tiller, Brian Phillips, Aubrey Watts, Ben Wiggins, and Marlene Williamson. Now, this year's high school team included Kaylin Bell, Jules Darden, Keegan Fortman, Julietta Garcia, Becca King, Anna Leitzenberger, Addison Lohman, Shane Nelson, Julia Nolan, Wes Ray, Helen Sarah, Bailey Suarez, and Rachel Vandergeest. Now, of course, we have to remember the coaches because the team is only as good as the leadership. So you got head coach Terry O'Shields and David O'Shields, who is our superintendent there in that district. They're both dear friends of mine. Kevin Cox, Michael Mack, Jason Smith, Amy Vaughn, Allison Lanford, Stan Walsh, Jimbo Langston, Scott Shiflett, Diane Summer, Sharon Lone, David Bell, Katie Scarlett, Maggie O'Shields, and Ashton Wilbanks. Clinton High School defeated 14 other high school teams to win, and they brought home the gold medal in astronomy, bridge building, chemistry lab, dynamic planning, environmental chemistry, forestry, and remote sensing, and the Wi-Fi lab. What great categories for STEM education. Clinton Middle School defeated all of its competition in each event. Congratulations to student of Clinton High School and Clinton Middle School for another Olympiad Science State Championship.
Your success is a testament not only to your talent and the hard work that you put in and the dedication, but it's a testament to the leaders and the teachers and the coaches that really helped you navigate this success. South Carolina is rooting for you as you compete in the National Science Olympiad tournament next month. You've got bright futures, and you are the innovators of tomorrow. The sky's the limit. Thank you for what you do. Congratulations on your win, and God bless you. And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, for 30 minutes.
Ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to address an issue that will not affect us until the second half of this century, an issue that I first addressed 23 years ago, the first year of this century. It is the issue of engineered intelligence, the race that the engineers don't know that they're in, a race between the bioengineers and DNA and the computer engineers and artificial intelligence, AI, to create a new level of intelligence on this planet, in effect, to develop our successor species. AI will have dramatic effects in the short term. It will have benefits because it is a powerful tool. It will be used by evil men and women because it is a powerful tool. They will use it to accomplish their goals, and sometimes they will make mistakes. They will invade privacy. They will deny loans to people who should get them for wrongful reasons. But these are issues that we have faced in the last 100 years, wherein this or that technology has invaded our privacy or discriminated against people in this or that financial transaction. My focus is the second half of this century, when we will face issues far beyond that. As to artificial intelligence, Elon Musk and Steve Wozniak and others have asked for a 6-month delay. But we will not see a 6-month delay in our research. And frankly, a 6-month delay wouldn't accomplish much, because the issues surrounding AI are intractable, and we have squandered at least the last 23 years in failing to deal with them. Another 6 months will do us little good. I want to commend the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and I don't commend Kevin McCarthy all that often, for bringing the entire House together 2 days ago to focus on the artificial intelligence issue and to hear from Professors Torralba and Madri of MIT. The professors showed us that AI clearly has met the Turing test. The Turing test was set forward by Professor Turing many, many decades ago. Professor Turing was in the was the subject of the imitation game, one of the most brilliant computer professors we have ever had, or that the Western world has ever had. And that test was that you would have a text chat with a computer and not be able to tell whether you were talking to a human or to a computer, and at that point, computers would have reached human levels of intelligence. Well, we've clearly got to that level. We call it Chat GPT. The chat is right in the name. But today's computers cheat on the Turing test. It's no longer a valid test, because today's computers have something Professor Turing from the 1940s and 1950s could not have imagined, and that is the internet. And they're able to mimic a human response just by looking at every other human response to a similar statement or question by looking at the entire internet. As the MIT professors pointed out, it's kind of like a parrot, able to say something that under some circumstances might be the right response without understanding the words. But AI will not, therefore, probably be intelligent the way I would view it for decades. We will need a new test, not the Turing test. But for now, AI is a tool. It is a great tool, as was writing and fire and jet travel and the internet. And we will be able to deal with that tool. But the second half of this century will see an AI that is intelligent, that has, or might very well see this. It may very well be self-aware, aware that it exists and that it exists on a planet that can be affected by things outside of its own existence. An AI may have volition, will, and it may have ambition, the desire to survive, perhaps the desire to propagate, and in any case, a desire to affect the world so as to achieve its own survival. AI is a powerful tool. China's not going to stop developing it for the next 6 months. American corporations see big profits. They're not going to stop developing it. And the private sector isn't going to spend much of its money making sure that AI is trustworthy. They're going to try to make sure that AI is profitable. So we need to be concerned about an AI that is self-aware and ambitious. Such a AI will have risks that are beyond the apocalypse to the human race. Therefore, I propose that 10% of all the money we spend on AI research be used to prevent and monitor for self-awareness, volition, and ambition. And perhaps also to monitor for AI's awareness that we are monitoring it for those purposes. If some futurist is describing what the second half of this century will look like, and they paint a picture that seems to be a science fiction movie, they might be wrong, they might be right. If a futurist paints a picture of the future that doesn't look like a science fiction movie, you know they're wrong. Our children will be living in a science fiction movie, we just don't know which one. Let us not build Skynet. If you remember the Terminator movies, you'll remember that Skynet destroyed most of the human race just seconds before it thought correctly that it was going to be unplugged. Terminator was a great movie to watch, a terrible movie to live in, and I don't know if we can count on Sarah Connor. There are two advantages that the human race has in preventing self-aware and ambitious AI. First, we're designing the AI, and we may understand what we're doing while we're doing it. We might. And second, the machines are inherently, from our experience, not volitional, not ambitious. They'll go to the largest computer and say to the computer, I'm planning to unplug you, break you up, and sell you for parts. And that computer will help you calculate how much money you can get for the parts. Now let's look at genetic engineering, bioengineering. While the largest computer seems fine with being unplugged, the smallest insect does not. Try stepping on a cockroach and see whether it is okay with being unplugged. The DNA, which didn't care whether it survived, didn't care to propagate, didn't, and isn't with us. So we may see genetic engineers, DNA engineers, start with human DNA and create a 1,000-pound mammal with a 100-pound brain that's going to beat your kids on the law school admissions test. And that mammal, like every other mammal, will probably have a survival instinct. So today's big headlines are about ChatGPT and artificial intelligence. Last year's big headline was about CRISPR, a new technology for the DNA engineers to use, and those headlines may turn out to be more important. It will be hard to limit genetic engineering because initially it will help deal with human tragedy. We will use genetic engineering to help cure disease. Genetic engineering will help the impaired human, will help to decrease disease or syndromes. First we will see us create the non-impaired human, the repaired human, and only then will we go forward to the transhuman. There's a second issue, kind of something off to the side, and that is some world leaders, and I'm looking at you, Kim Jong-un, will seek to create submissive or subservient humans genetically. And third, also off to the side, there are animal rights advocates who have argued that animals have reached a point where they deserve constitutional rights. Well, when genetic engineers create a pet dog or a working dog with near human intelligence, those animal rights advocates may have a point. So let us return to the great race to create transhuman intelligence that is self-aware and ambitious. We need rules regarding genetic engineering that make it plain that while it is okay to seek to prevent intellectual disability, it is not okay to use genetic engineering to create intelligence beyond that of the average human. And, of course, we need to prevent the use of genetic engineering to create animals of greater intelligence than that animal species, or humans of impaired will or impaired intelligence. We know one thing. Intelligence is the most powerful thing on the planet. It is intelligence that gave us fire. It is intelligence that gave us nuclear fusion. It is the intelligence that gives us an unstoppable supply of cat videos on our phone. Last time a new level of intelligence arose on this planet, it is when our ancestors said hello to Neanderthal. Didn't work out well for Neanderthal. So there's a race between the computer engineers and AI, the bioengineers and DNA, to develop the next level of intelligence, perhaps to create our successor species. Will the next dominant species on this planet be carbon-based or silicon-based? The product of genetic engineering or the product of computer engineering? Artificial intelligence is in the lead, creating an incredible level of intelligence that is useful to us now and is progressing at the speed of computing. But genetic engineering starts with a raw material that has a survival instinct and ambition. I don't know who will win this race. I'm old-fashioned. I'm rooting for Team Human, which may not even be in the race. Mr. Speaker, I would like to address recent events in Pakistan. In evaluating those events, some would say that America should root for whichever political leader styles themselves as more pro-American, has been easier for us to deal with on this or that bilateral issue. But I would say, and I think the State Department agrees, that what comes first is our dedication to democracy and the rule of law. Imran Khan was difficult for us to deal with. Prime Minister Sharif, somewhat easier. But the question is democracy and the rule of law. The Supreme Court of Pakistan has ruled that there should be provincial elections in Punjab and later on in another province. That is the rule of law. I believe that Supreme Court has ruled that its initial ruling is final and unappealable. and that the Supreme Court has ordered that the funds be released as are necessary to hold those provincial elections. America stands not with this policy or that policy or a government that will agree with us on this issue or that issue. America stands for democracy and the rule of law. And we also stand for human rights, and the right of free speech and the right to express one's opinions. And I, of course, have been concerned about some of the terrible disappearances, some of the abuses of human rights, some of the substantial evidence of torture. So we need human rights and democracy in Pakistan. We need the rule of law, and America stands not with its short-term bilateral concerns, but with our dedication to democracy and human rights. And most important of all, Pakistan has national elections set forth in October. And nothing is more important for Pakistan than that those elections be timely, legitimate, fair, and that whoever wins the elections be allowed to govern. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn my attention to an issue that too many in Washington didn't pay attention to, as over 600,000 people died, and now some are not paying attention to on the theory that the problem is over. I speak of northern Ethiopia, Tigray. While the cessation of hostilities agreement was signed in November, the Tigrayan people continue to face ethnic violence and discrimination. Earlier this month, the AP reported that Amhara forces have renewed their campaign of ethnic cleansing against Tigrayan civilians and have uprooted roughly 47,000 Tigrayans from areas in southern Tigray just since March. Amhara forces are carrying out this campaign of ethnic cleansing through forced evictions, harassments, and murder. And throughout all history, ethnic cleansing and genocide have gone together. This is not a standalone event, but rather follows a horrific campaign of ethnic cleansing by Tigrayan civilians by Amhara regional forces that began in the year 2020. Last year, Secretary Blinken publicly recognized that members of the Amharan forces have committed crimes against humanity of the deportation and forcible transfer, committed ethnic cleansing in western Tigray, in addition to war crimes and crimes against humanity, including murder, rape, and other forms of sexual violence. This is on top of the involvement of Eritrean forces in Tigray. Eritrea is a separate country. It has no business having its troops anywhere in Ethiopia. The determination made by our State Department on what is happening in Tigray follows extensive reporting by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International just in April of 2022, which documented the systematic expulsion of several hundred thousand Tigrayan civilians from their homes using threats, unlawful killings, sexual violence, mass arbitrary detention, pillage, forcible transfer, and the denial of humanitarian assistance. We have many things going on in the world. I know that most of our foreign policy, or a very large chunk of it, is focused on events in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. But Washington cannot turn away from this issue, nor can we assume that the cessation of hostilities agreement solves the problem. The people of Tigray deserve our attention and engagement of the United States and the entire international community, and our leaders in Washington need to focus on what has been the most deadly event of the last several years. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back. Except to say I wish to yield 1 minute to Mr. Arlington.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize and celebrate the anniversary of a West Texas treasure. 100 years ago today, Governor Pat Neff signed Senate Bill 103 that created what would become my proud alma mater, Texas Tech University. Today, Texas Tech's student population consists of 40,000 of the best and brightest young men and women from around the country and the world. I love Texas Tech and everything it represents. Our first president, Paul Horn, said it best. Everything that's done in these West Texas plains ought to be done on a big scale. Let our thoughts be big thoughts and broad thoughts. Let our thinking be in worldwide terms. Texas Tech has embodied that vision. Its students and alumni have lived up to that calling for an entire century. I am so proud to bear our banner far and wide on behalf of Red Raider Nation as we strive for honor evermore. Happy 100th birthday to Texas Tech. Wreck 'em, get your guns up, and God bless West Texas. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for Texas. Seeing no one else who wishes me to yield them time, I yield back to the chair. Thank you.
The gentleman yields. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, for 30 minutes.
Thank you very much. I think the next 2.5 months of this institution are going to be consumed with the budget and the amount of spending. I don't think the press has done an adequate job of alerting to the public to the crisis we currently have. As we've talked before, we are headed towards the federal debt of $31 trillion being 100% of GDP. And of course, over time, as the value of the dollar changes, it sometimes makes it difficult to see exactly how bad that is. But the last time the debt was as great as the gross national product was the end of World War II. Now, at the end of World War II, America was very economically strong because Japan and Europe were flattened by the end of World War II. But even more, we knew at the end of World War II that we were going to lay off hundreds of thousands of military personnel. We know that the factories would stop building the ships and the planes and the tanks that were necessary for World War II. And therefore, we knew we were heading into a time of dramatically decreased spending. And that's exactly what happened. At the end of World War II, slowly we dropped from 100% of GDP, debt equal to down to a little over 20%. Things were really getting under control. We were a little bit over 20% during the presidency of Richard Nixon. Then things began to slowly rise again, but recently, in part with COVID and in part the completely reckless spending under President Biden, we're headed back to 100% again. But the American public has to stop and think. Well, we knew at the end of World War II spending was inevitably going to drop. We live at a time of an aging population in which the amount of money we're spending on Medicare and Social Security is going to continue to go up if we do nothing else. Now, we sure should never, ever cut Social Security. I will not do that. And we should not be reducing any Medicare benefits, which means we have to look at the rest of the budget. And what do we see in President Biden's vision for America is? Let's look at the budget that he's already proposed for the calendar year beginning October 1st. Line after line after line does not show the cuts that are necessary and the Republican Party is prepared to make. Department of Agriculture, up 14%. Department of Commerce, up 11%. Department of Education, 13.5%. Department of Energy, 13.5%. Department of Interior, over 9%. Department of Labor, 11%. The Department of State, which is wasteful, 11%. Department of Treasury, 15%. And that Department of Treasury, of course, includes a nice equity advisory board. The Environmental Protection Agency, up 19%. The National Science Foundation, up 18%. Wherever you look, President Biden has responded to the greatest debt to GDP ratio in my lifetime by raising spending 8, 9, 10%. About the only areas without significant increases are the military, despite President Biden, as far as I can see, doing very little to try to end the war in Ukraine, and the southern border. By the way, I want to repeat an anecdote to let the chair know exactly the mindset of the Biden administration when it comes to Homeland Security. I was down on that border 2 weeks ago. I have been a fan of drug dogs, which is so necessary given that the majority of drugs which flow across the border, killing 107,000 Americans, are very handy for the Border Patrol and ICE. I asked a member of the union, Border Patrol union down there, what he thought of the dogs, figuring he would, of course, want more. He said, no, we don't need more dogs, because the last time the Border Patrol got more dogs under President Biden, they bought 38 new dogs, not to snuff out drugs, not to prevent the killing of over 100,000 Americans a year. What did they do with the drug sniffing, with the new dogs? They got therapy dogs because they heard the Border Patrol was stressed. Well, of course the Border Patrol is stressed. You have so many people coming across the border, and the administration is not acting or making the policy changes necessary to control the border. But what can you say for an administration when presented with the possibility of new dogs at the border, feels the priority is therapy dogs, so if the Border Patrol agents feel stressed, they have a dog to pet? But that is a true story of the priorities of the Biden administration at the border. In any event, as you can see, virtually many agencies over 10% increases, with the major outlier there being Defense and Homeland Security. Now, we should comment a little bit more on the Equity Advisory Board at Treasury. Not only does the Department of Treasury have new bureaucrats designed to determine how we are going to treat people by race or sex or sexual preference, these new boards or commissions are put throughout the new budget. And the function of these boards, I feel, is to divide America. Rather than being the America, a meritocracy that our forefathers envisioned, in which everybody is being treated equal, the Biden administration, in the name of diversity, is including bureaucrats everywhere to determine who gets hired, who gets promoted, and who gets the relevant grants. This is something that people are afraid to talk about, and I don't like to talk about, but do we want to head into a country, which other countries have gone down this path, in which they say X number of people of this background have to be government employees here, or grants have to go there. It always results in very hard feelings, and when you begin to hire people by that, you're not always hiring the best people. And I think Americans have to ask themselves, as we train the new generation of doctors, as we train the new generation of air traffic controllers, as we train the new generations of engineers, which determine the viability of our manufacturing as we compete with companies abroad, are we going to continue to hire the best, allow the best to be promoted, or are we going to fall back into some sort of third world country in which we divide our nation by what other countries would call tribes, might be religious, whatever? I'll repeat an anecdote I talked about last week, which I don't think the National Press Corps has picked up on, but they should pick up on. Not long after President Biden took office, two Democrat senators, Tammy Duckworth and Mazie Hirono, one from Illinois and one from Hawaii, said that they would not vote for any more of President Biden's appointees if they were white men unless they were gay. Now, that's an awkward thing to talk about. It's kind of scary that we had two U.S. senators taking such a divisive position. But then we had a legal journal, did a little bit of research a couple months ago on the judicial appointments by President Biden. 97 judicial appointments. The author of this article, I talked to her, was not even for or against this. She really had no opinions on what she found. But of the 97 new judges, only 5 were white men. And at least 2 of those 5, might be more, were gay. So at least when it comes to judicial appointments, President Biden is following the path of a kind of a dislike, almost hatred, for people who used to make up the majority of this country. I hope more studies are done along those lines, and I hope there's a little bit of outrage, because I have a feeling President Biden may be following down the same path when it comes to other appointees, and quite frankly doing all he can to get the same sort of ratios when it comes to government spending, or trying to do this when it comes to businesses that do business with the government. We recently heard as well that the Biden administration is doing what they can to penalize frugal borrowers. And what they want to do is, if you want to borrow money from a bank and you're a good credit risk because you're not a spendthrift, they feel that you ought to have to pay a higher interest rate, because they want to subsidize people who spend all their money and don't save money, and they feel those people should get a lower interest rate. I think this diversity has come out of control. There's a huge cost related to it. We have heard in a committee that I'm on that there are bureaucratic diversity professionals who are making $200,000 a year in our universities. More of these people are going to have to be hired by private business. It's first of all at a time when we have a labor shortage. Insofar as there are people looking for new jobs, those jobs should be in manufacturing, in construction, in agriculture, even in tourism. Wherever you look, we need more people, not more highly paid bureaucrats who, when they look at people, solely view people by race or gender or sexual preference. In any event, I hope the press does a better job of going through President Biden's recommendations line by line in the budget and see whether they are the type of things we would like to see for a country that is in deep danger by the overall amount of debt we have. And particularly, I hope the press corps hones in on these new bureaucrats as to exactly what they are doing, since their job is not to do anything productive, but just make sure that everybody in the federal government looks at people as a token of race or gender or sexual preference. Thank you. I'm told here I should yield another 2 minutes to Congressman Arrington. Yes, he thought of something else to say.
How much time is remaining?
Lots of time. You got lots of time, I assure you.
Well, I want to thank my colleague from
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague from Wisconsin and my fellow Budget Committee member for his passion to save this country from a sovereign debt crisis and protect our nation's next generation from reaping the whirlwind of this reckless spending and this unsustainable debt path that we're on. We must fight for the future of our country. And all the things that are talked about in this great chamber, and all the great ideas, and all the threats that are posed to this country of ours and its future will all be undermined and jeopardized because we will have failed to simply steward the taxpayers' resources and our children's future. So thank you for that, Mr. Grothman, for your leadership and your passion. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to celebrate the life of a true American hero and a very dear friend, General Bernard Mittermeier, who passed away this January after 92 rich, full, extraordinary years. He was a first-generation immigrant from South America. who really lived the American dream. 28 years in the military. He rose to the rank of general. He served as Surgeon General of the Army under President Reagan, and he received a number of awards and recognitions, including the Distinguished Flying Cross, which is the highest award, peacetime award in the military. I worked with him at Texas Tech, where he was a physician, he was the dean of the medical school, and he was the president of the Health Sciences Center. And he had an indomitable spirit, he had an infectious optimism, and all of those things helped culminate in his leadership efforts to create the super clinic for treating and servicing our wounded warriors in West Texas in partnership with Texas Tech, and it has been a phenomenal asset for veterans in the western part of Texas. And that is going to be one of many, but I'm sure for him it was the most special legacy that he left for the people of West Texas. I just want to say it was an honor to know him. I'm a better man for having come alongside of him in my time at Texas Tech. I also want to say to his wife, Mary Beth, we love you, and the Mittermeier family, we're praying for you, and we know that the general has gone to the great commander-in-chief in heaven, and he's in a great place, and he's as alive as he's ever been, and we will be with General Mittermeier once again. And I take great hope and joy in that. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back to the gentleman from Wisconsin, and I'm grateful for the indulgence.
Does the gentleman from Wisconsin have a motion?
Yes, I move that we now adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 11 a.m. on Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023.